The House That Remembers. Written by KX. Epigraph. What the dead cannot carry with them, they leave buried in the living. Chapter 1. The Sound Beneath the Floor. The house inhaled without lungs, drawing in dust and silence as if they were twin sustenances. For decades its empty rooms exhaled stale, metallic scent that clung to the cracked plaster. Wind slipped through the cracked hinges like a forgotten guest who no longer bothered to knock, and at night the walls muttered low, private verses that no ear had ever been meant to hear. Abandoned structures never truly sleep. They merely wait for the next disturbance. He arrived just as daylight waned, the sky turning an unfinished shade of ash. The road that once led to the porch seemed thinner, as if time itself had been gnawing away at the earth. Wild grass clawed at the threshold. The gate hung at a precarious angle, and rust clotted the iron like dry blood. Nothing moved, and that stillness felt wrong. When a place truly dies, it freezes. This house, however, pulsed with an unseen awareness. He pushed the door, which resisted a moment before surrendering, spilling out a breath of rot, dry plaster and a faint metallic tang. Dust lay over everything like a thin veil of ash. The furniture remained in the positions they had been left, as if the house expected the owners to return at any instant. No one had lived there for years, yet the silence pressed against his ears like a weight. His own breathing seemed intrusive. He moved deeper, each step stirring particles that floated lazily in the dim light. The old beam sighed with the tired patience of wood that had borne too much weight for too long. Then, faintly, a soft shifting rose from beneath the floorboards, not the creak of old wood, but a hollow echo that seemed to come from an empty void. He halted. The sound ceased with him. He told himself it was coincidence. Houses settle with expands, and the structure settles in quiet ways. He continued, and the hollow tone returned whisper-thin, as if the floor itself were trying to speak. The hallway narrowed, a corridor he vaguely recalled from childhood, when his parents never permitted him to wander alone. The boards that were darker, worn thin. When his foot pressed a particular plank, a low echo answered from below. He froze. The noise did not belong to the wood. It belonged to an empty space. He crouched, feeling the air grow colder, though only enough for his skin to notice. He lifted the odd plank. It rose too easily, as if someone had placed it there for a future hand to find. Beneath the floor lay a narrow cavity, not a cellar, but a deliberately carved slit between the foundations. Someone patient had hidden something there. Inside, a small object lay wrapped in tattered cloth. He brushed the fabric. It crumbled into fine fibers that clung to his fingers. Beneath it sat a plain wooden box, unadorned, lockless, its surface scarred with shallow gouges, signs of restless hands. He lifted the box. The hall seemed to sigh, the wind outside stopping entirely. Inside lay a notebook, its cover a faded brown, pages yellowed and fragile, edges curled with age. Ink lines waited on the first page, a single sentence centered on the page. He read it silently. Then again, and suddenly the house itself made a sound. Not wind, not settling timber, but something deeper, as if the walls had been holding their breath and now exhaled. The line read, "If you are reading this, the house has chosen you." The floorboard behind him creaked, though he had not moved. Chapter 2. The Way to the First Page. Night fell inside the house long before the sun set outside. Light struggled through narrow windows, stretching thin across the dust before dissolving into gray. He knelt beside the lifted plank, the notebook heavy in his hands. Its pages were ordinary. No strange symbols, no grotesque drawings. Just the simplest tool a human can use to leave a trace. The opening sentence felt less like a simple message and more like a concealed summons. The word chosen lingered, its weight stretching across the dim room. He did not believe houses could select people. Walls did not observe. Buildings do not wait. Yet the quiet around him thickened, as though the house had become aware that its secret had been uncovered. He closed a notebook halfway, considering returning it to the box, resealing the plank, and leaving the house exactly as it had been. Instincts older than reason whispered warnings, urging him to retreat. Still curiosity, humanity's oldest betrayal, won. He rose, dust slipping from his knees. The hallway seemed to contract, not because the walls had moved, but because the air itself had changed. The silence now felt like a room full of unseen listeners. He carried the notebook to the living room table, its surface scarred by years of use, plates, cups, children's careless carvings. The house remembered its occupants by those marks. He opened the notebook again. The first page held only the single sentence. The second page began in a calmer hand, each stroke deliberate, as if the writer feared the ink might not survive the ages. He began to read. Every family believes it knows its own history. This belief comforts them, but comfort often hides truth. A cold draft slipped through the room, rubbing the walls like long-forgotten fingers. He continued. The house was built before any of us were born, and long before it ever bore our name. His breath grew shallow, the room growing colder each time the words grew darker. When the first of our blood came here, the house was already waiting. He leaned back, remembering that old houses change owners, that families move in with histories they never fully comprehend. Yet the next line refused that simple explanation. The man who built the house never truly left it. A sudden chill brushed his neck. The hallway beyond had become an abyss of darkness, the faint light from the windows unable to penetrate. He turned his gaze back to the notebook. The writing continued. People believe death separates the living from the dead. This belief comforts them, but comfort often hides truth. A soft sound emerged from the ceiling, a low, slow shifting of weight across ancient beams. He paused, the house falling into an abrupt, oppressive silence. Nothing followed. Perhaps the wood had settled. Perhaps time had weakened the structure. Perhaps nothing at all. He turned to the final line on the page, ink thicker, hand trembling. If the house has chosen you, then it has already begun remembering. A creak sounded from behind him, though he had not moved. He turned slowly. The darkness behind him was no longer empty. Chapter 3. The shape inside the dark. Darkness never arrives suddenly. It spreads, seeping into rooms, objects, thoughts, until the mind adjusts and forgets the light that once filled it. The hallway had become that kind of darkness, deeper than an evening's shadow, a thickness that seemed to swallow the faint glow from the living room. He remained seated, listening. A subtle shift of wood behind him, a chair's quiet complaint, alerted him that something had moved, though his hands had not touched it. He felt his muscles tense, his breath slow, his attention sharpen. He turned further toward the hallway, finding only darkness, no figure, no movement. The rational mind offered explanations. Old houses settle, air shifts through cracks, furnishings tilt. Yet the house's quiet logic demanded a fragile assumption that the world behaves as we expect. He closed the notebook. The rustle of paper sounded louder than the still room. The house seemed to listen. He stood, a faint tremor traveling to the floor beneath his feet, just enough to remind him that the entire structure rested on ancient beams that had survived decades. Old bones, he thought. Every building eventually becomes a skeleton. He walked the hallway carefully, each step measured. The darkness of the far end waited, giving nothing away. The air grew colder, a subtle chill that brushed his skin. At the hallway's end, a wall of peeling paint revealed thin strips of old plaster. Yet he sensed an unmistakable shift, as if something unseen had moved nearby. He turned back to the living room. A soft rustle reached his ears, not from the hallway, but from the room itself. Paper moving, a page turning on its own. He approached the table. The notebook lay open, its ink now more hurried, lines slanted, the writer's hand shaking. He read, "The house does not reveal itself immediately. It waits. At first you will notice small changes, sounds that cannot be explained, objects moving when no one touches them." A cold sensation traveled down his spine. The page continued. "This is how it learns you. The house studies its chosen ones, studies their fear. A single board behind him creaked softly, not loud, just enough to draw his attention. He did not turn immediately. The sound had not come from the hallway, but from the living room itself, from somewhere deeper. The house fell completely silent, the kind of silence that follows a completed movement. Slowly, he turned his head and realized the second chair at the table no longer faced the wall. It now faced him, its empty seat turned inward as if awaiting his gaze. Chapter 4, The Second Presence. Movement leaves traces, sometimes only in the mind, a subtle certainty that something has shifted when no hand has touched it. He stared at the chair now positioned a few feet from him, directly across the table. He remembered it angled toward the wall moments before. The memory of its placement sat in his mind with the same certainty as the memory of a cup's location. Now the chair faced him, its wooden back inviting, its presence deliberate, almost beckoning. He did not move. Instinct told him to stay still, to become a stationary hunter awaiting a predator. The chair remained motionless, yet its stillness felt intentional, inviting. He pulled the chair out and sat, the old wood groaning softly as joints remembered movement after years of stillness. The house remained silent, but silence can be patient. He leaned forward. Across the table, the empty chair stared back, its frame now holding a weight of expectation. A strange, unwelcome thought rose. The chair had not turned toward the room. It had turned toward him. He opened the next page. The handwriting had darkened. Letters uneven where the writer's hand had begun to tremble. The first night is always the quietest. Many believe nothing will happen. They imagine the signs. A faint creak sounded from behind the table. Not loud, just a soft complaint with adjusting somewhere inside the house. He read on. This is when the house decides whether you are worthy of its memory. The ceiling above trembled faintly, a slow drag of something across old beams. The final lines, written with a pressure that made the ink look as though it were carved rather than written. The house remembers what people did. A soft breath reached him, not his own. He recognized the rhythm of his own breathing, yet the sound was another's, quieter, deeper. He lifted his eyes. The chair opposite him remained unmoved, yet the air above it carried a faint disturbance, like heat rising from a distant road, a shape scarcely discernible, warping the darkness. It seemed to watch him. Chapter 5, The Breath Between Pages. The mind shields itself when the impossible appears, reshaping moments, softening what the eyes claim to see. He gazed at the space above the chair. A barely visible disturbance lingered. Not a shape, not a form, merely a subtle warping of the air as if darkness itself had thickened in that single spot. He refused to blink. He knew that closing his eyes would surrender the moment, allowing whatever lingered to change, disappear, or draw nearer. His breathing slowed. The chair's empty seat now seemed heavier, as if it bore an unseen authority. Yet no body rested there. The faint disturbance shifted slightly, like breath through invisible lungs. It swayed forward, then back, a slow rhythm that felt like breathing. His fingers tightened around the notebook's edge. The paper whispered under his grip. The movement of the disturbance ceased the instant his hand brushed the air, as if the unseen presence had heard him. He realized that whatever hovered above the chair could hear him. The realization settled like cold water into a glass. The house had not merely revealed something. It had introduced an entity that already existed, watching, waiting. He lowered his eyes to the notebook. The next page had already been exposed, the ink thinner, the handwriting compressed, as if the writer were trying to conserve space, to stretch time itself. He read quietly. The presence will not appear clearly. His throat tightened. The next line followed. The house does not show all its memories at once. He glanced upward again. The disturbance hovered, unmoving, patient. He continued. At first you will only feel it. Later you may see it. Eventually. The final word had been violently scratched out, ink tearing across the page as if the writer had tried to erase a regret. Below it, a shorter, darker line emerged. Do not let it sit with you too long. A quiet sound rose from across the table. The chair creaked softly, not from weight, but from an invisible pressure pressing down into the seat. The disturbance thickened. The air above the chair seemed to grow heavier, as if a weight had settled there. For a heartbeat, the darkness above the chair gathered itself into a suggestion of form. Shoulders, a head, an outline without features. His heart hammered louder. Each pulse sounded as though the unseen thing could hear it. The notebook's page trembled beneath his fingers. Another sentence waited near the bottom, ink older than the rest. The first one only watches. His eyes drifted to the final line, carved deep enough that the letters threatened to split the paper. The others arrived later. A sound moved in the hallway. Not a creak, not a footfall, but a slow, measured tread approaching the room. Chapter 6. The Memory That Walks. A soft, metronomic thump rose from the hallway, each strike identical in pressure, distance, and timing. The rhythm was too perfect to belong to a living foot. No human gait repeats itself with such mechanical precision. The sound traveled through the house's timber ribs and down into the earth, vibrating the packed soil beneath the notebook-clutching figure. He did not turn toward the corridor. Instead, his attention stayed on the chair opposite him, where an invisible weight hovered, its presence as still as the air in a sealed tomb. The house now held three awarenesses. His own frantic mind, the unseen observer seated across the table, and the precise footfall echoing from a hallway. The footsteps drew nearer, each one a quiet hammer on ancient boards, a reminder that something massive pressed down on the floor's weak points. The beams above groaned, as if the weight of the world was being measured in slow, deliberate steps. He felt a chill seep into his spine, the cold radiating from the floorboards that supported an unseen mass. The notebook trembled lightly in his hands, its pages fluttering like moth wings caught in stale draft. A faint vibration passed through the wood beneath his chair, a subtle shift, that whisper of a body heavy enough to bend the beams, yet careful enough to remain silent. The unseen presence across the table tilted its head, as if listening to a conversation it could not join. He lifted his gaze, and the floorboard behind him gave a low, mournful groan, as if the house itself were sighing under the strain. The sound seemed to come from the very heart of the structure, a deep, resonant note that reverberated through his chest. A new line of ink appeared on the page he held, the letters forming with a trembling hand. The second one walks. His breath caught. He read the continuation. It was the first builder who buried it here. The words felt like a confession, whispered from stone. He sensed the weight behind him shift once more, a subtle movement that suggested the heavy silhouette was adjusting its stance. A cold scent of ancient earth rose from the floor, the smell of soil that had not felt sunlight in centuries. The air above the chair grew denser, pressing against his throat as if the house were inhaling his fear. He turned his head slowly. There, just beyond the dim outline of the doorway, a dark shape stood, tall, immovable, its outline barely discernible against the gloom. The figure did not move, yet the floor beneath its feet vibrated with a pressure that seemed to pulse in time with the hidden footsteps. He read the next sentence, the ink darker, as though the writer had pressed harder. It does not see the living. A shiver ran through him, the thought of an entity that could not perceive him making the darkness feel even more oppressive. The words continued. It only searches for the one who disturbed the ground. The line ended abruptly, the final ink blot marred by a harsh, scratched mark that cut through the delicate letters. He leaned closer, straining to decipher the ragged scrawl. If it finds you standing. The page trembled under his fingers as the scratched letters glistened like fresh blood. A low, drawn breath passed over his neck, the chill deepening as if the unseen presence were exhaling through the cracks in the timber. The chair across the table creaked once, a tiny protest of wood against the invisible pressure. He forced his eyes back to the page, the sentence now complete. It will remember what you look like. The ink was thick, each stroke heavy with intention. The house seemed to hold its breath, the silence pressing in from every direction. The footfall in the hallway halted for a moment, then resumed, each step a deliberate tap on the ancient floor, a reminder that something massive was moving, even if the darkness concealed its shape. He felt the weight of the unseen entity tilt ever so slightly, as if the house itself were turning the figure toward him. The air rose in a slow, deliberate swell, the pressure building like a tide that might soon drown him. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, matching the steady thump from the hallway. He realized that the house was a patient predator, measuring his fear, cataloging his reactions, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The notebook's final line for this page settled itself onto the paper in a harsh, deliberate hand. The house collects memories. A faint, distant creak rose in the ceiling, the sound of timber flexing under the weight of unseen feet. He closed his eyes for a breath, letting the darkness wrap around him like a shroud, trying to steady the tremor that threatened to unmake his resolve. When he opened them again, the hallway was quiet. The footsteps had paused, as if contemplating the next move. The heavy silhouette remained stationary, its presence a cold shadow that pressed against the very marrow of the house. He whispered to the empty chair, his voice a hoarse rasp. "What do you want?" No answer came, only the soft, steady thrum of the house's heart beating beneath the floorboards. Chapter 7. The Rule of Stillness. Stillness is not peace. It is restraint. The predator on the plain learns that patience kills more efficiently than the sprint to the hunted. Motion wastes energy, and motion betrays intent. The room had fallen into a silence so total, it seemed to drink sound before it could form. 3 presences occupied the space now. His frightened self, the invisible watcher across the table, and the massive dark shape that lingered near the doorway. None of them moved. He counted his breaths. Each inhale a slow climb, each exhale a soft sigh that barely disturbed the dust motes drifting lazily in the stale air. 1, 2, 3. The stone-cold scent of ancient earth rose again, a faint odor of burial that seemed to cling to the walls like a memory, refusing to fade. He imagined the shape of the unseen weight, a towering colossus, invisible, yet its mass pressed down on the floor, making the boards tremble with each tiny shift. The house's ribs creaked in quiet acknowledgement, as if the building itself were aware of the tension threading through its bones. His mind drifted to images of a world above, where people moved through rooms unaware of the hidden dread below. He imagined a child's laughter echoing in the hallway, the clang of a spoon against a porcelain cup, the rustle of curtains in a passing breeze. All ordinary sounds that, to the house, were merely data points in an ever-growing ledger presence. The notebook, still clutched in his fist, began to write on its own, the ink flowing in a slow, deliberate torrent. The letters formed a new warning. The walking one follows rules. His pulse quickened, a brief flash of fear, then an immediate steadiness as he remembered the words of first builder whispered through the centuries. The page continued. It cannot see you if you do not acknowledge it. A soft, mournful creak rose on the floor beneath the unseen weight, a tiny protest against a pressure it could not fully contain. He read on. Looking at it teaches it who you are. His breath caught again, the cold air around his throat tightening as if the house itself were gripping his windpipe. The next line emerged, the ink thick and resolute. Once it learns your face, it will never forget. A faint sigh drifted from the space behind him, the sound of a shifting stone deep within the earth, a reminder that the darkness below was listening, learning, remembering. He turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto the massive form that stood near the doorway. Its outline remained vague, a silhouette that seemed to shift with each breath of the house. The weight seemed to lean ever so slightly forward, as if the unseen entity were trying to listen more closely to his heartbeat. The notebook's final sentence for this page settled itself onto the paper with a deliberate, heavy hand. The house collects what belongs to it. A far-off thump echoed from the hallway, the sound of a footfall that had traveled the length of the house, a reminder that something else roamed the upper floors. He closed the notebook gently, the pages whispering as they fell against each other, a soft susurrus that seemed to mingle with the house's own sighs. His eyes drifted back to the chair opposite him. The unseen presence there was still, but the air above the seat seemed to ripple, as if a faint pulse of breath passed through the darkness, warping the space like heat rising from a fire that was never lit. He felt a cold finger brush his cheek, though no hand had touched him. He swallowed, the sound of his own gulp echoing in the stillness. The house seemed to inhale, the old beams groaning softly under the invisible load. Each creak a word in a language older than any spoken by the living. He whispered into the darkness, his voice low, a thread of sound that barely disturbed the thick air. "I will not be your plaything." No answer came, only the soft, rhythmic beating of the house's heart, a pulse that thrummed to the floor and into his bones. Chapter 8. The Thing Beneath Memory. Sound travels through old houses as if through bone, each vibration carried from one timber member to another, a whisper of movement that could be felt as well as heard. The faint scraping that had begun in the lower foundation grew louder, a low, relentless friction that seemed to come from something massive sliding against packed earth. At first it had been a faint hiss, a whisper of soil shifting, but now it sounded like the grinding of ancient stone against stone, a sound that spoke of long-forgotten labor. He remained seated, his hands curled around the notebook as if it could act as a shield against the growing noise. The rule written on the page still guided him. Stillness protected. He forced himself to stay motionless, feeling the tremor of the house's bones beneath him. The scraping intensified, a rhythm that grew stronger with each passing second, as if the earth itself were testing the limits of the floor's endurance. The wood beneath the table emitted a long, mournful complaint, a groan that rose like a wounded animal. Dust drifted from the ceiling in fine, gray threads, settling slowly on his shoulders like a veil. The notebook trembled in his grip, the pages shifting as if the wind were turning them, though no wind came from the open windows. The hollow beneath the floor opened wider, the crack in the boards expanding just enough for the darkness below to become a visible void. Something massive pressed upward, the pressure building with a patient, inexorable force. He looked down, the darkness now taking on shape, a low, undulating silhouette of compacted soil that seemed to pulse with each mild vibration from above. The earth below was testing the structure, probing for weakness, as if the house were a living creature feeling its own skin. The notebook's ink shifted, forming fresh sentences as his eyes remained fixed on the widening gap. The third one does not walk. The words appeared in a hurried scrawl, the hand trembling as if the writer were aware of the growing danger. He read the next line. It remembers the ground. A cold breath rose from the opening, carried with it the smell of damp earth and ancient stone, a scent that seemed to seep into his lungs and settle there heavy as lead. The page continued. It was buried deeper than the rest. The implication settled in his mind like a stone dropped into a still pond, ripples spreading outward through his thoughts. The scraping paused for a heartbeat, then resumed with renewed vigor, a sound that seemed to echo off the very walls of the house, reverberating like a mournful chant. The notebook's final line for this passage formed slowly, each letter carved deep into the paper. When the buried one wakes, even the others remember fear. The sound of a wooden beam splitting echoed through the room, a sharp crack that seemed to split time itself. The floorboards beneath the table lifted slightly, as though the earth below was pulling them upward, teasing the wood with a promise of release. A massive pressure rose from the darkness, not with claws nor with teeth, but with an immense, inexorable weight that pushed against the very foundation of the house. The wood beneath his chair groaned, a low, resonant moan that seemed to be the house's own lament. He felt the vibration travel up his spine, a tremor that made his heart race despite his attempts to remain still. The notebook's pages fluttered, a dry rustle that sounded like leaves being shredded by a gale. New ink bled across the parchment, forming a stark warning. The soil shifts, the earth remembers. A faint, distant sound of footsteps rose from above, the rhythm slower than the scraping below. A reminder that the world above remained unaware of the struggle below. He forced his eyes closed, trying to shut out the dark shape that seemed to grow taller with each breath the house took. The darkness behind him seemed to pulse, as if the very stone were beating a slow, patient heart. When he opened them again, the hollow beneath the floor had widened enough for a thin sliver of light from the hallway to sneak down, painting a pale line across the packed soil. The darkness beyond the line remained impenetrable, a blackness that seemed to swallow any thought that dared approach it. His hand trembled as he turned the notebook to a fresh page. The ink bled slowly, forming a new phrase. The earth does not rise without cause. He read on. It pushes upward only when the house commands. The house, he realized, was not a passive structure. It was an entity that orchestrated the movement of the earth beneath it, a conductor of unseen forces. A soft, low rumble rose from the darkness, a sound that felt like the sigh of a sleeping giant. The pressure on the floor increased, a subtle but undeniable force that seemed to press his very thoughts down into the soil. The notebook's final sentence for this moment settled itself in a stark, heavy hand. The door will open when the house wills it. A sudden, sharp crack sounded from the far wall. A thin line of fracture that spider-webbed across the plaster, an echo of the deeper fracture forming beneath the floor. Chapter 9. The Weight That Rises. The house did not collapse. Old structures fail suddenly when they become weak, when beams split, walls crack. Foundations give way without warning. This house, however, resisted. Each wooden joint strained as though it understood that a sudden rupture would release something far worse than a simple collapse. The floor beneath the table began to rise, a slow, deliberate lift that felt like the earth itself was breathing upward. The motion was gentle, not violent, yet it carried the patience of centuries. The cracked beam above groaned, a sound that resonated through the room like a low, mournful howl. Dust rose from the wooden boards, swirling in the stale air. The particles caught in a thin beam of dim light that filtered through the cracked window. The scent of the earth below grew richer, an older, colder aroma that seemed to carry the memory of a time before any human foot ever touched the ground. He remained seated, his hands still wrapped around the notebook, his eyes focused on the slow ascent of the floorboards. The pressure in his chest increased, a sensation of heaviness that felt as if the house were pulling his very soul toward the widening crack beneath the floor. The notebook's ink formed new words, each letter appearing with deliberate slowness, as if the writer were reluctant to add another warning. The buried one was never meant to wake. His breath caught, the word striking a chord deep within his marrow. The next line followed. The first builder understood what he had found beneath the land. He imagined a man long dead, his hands scarred from labor, his eyes fixed on the dark soil that hid the secret he had uncovered. A soft, distant sound with grinding echoed from the hallway, the floorboard above sighing under the weight of unseen feet. The house seemed to listen. Its beams resonated with a low, mournful tone. The notebook continued. He buried it where the foundation would trap it. He felt the floor tilt ever so slightly, the weight of the earth pressing upward as if the darkness below were attempting to claim its place in the world above. A sharp crack rang out, a thin line of fracture slicing through a beam, the sound like a bone breaking in a silent room. The floor beneath the table lifted further, the boards bowing under the unseen pressure, the soil beneath them shifting like a living thing. He read the next warning, the ink darker, the letters heavy. The house was built not to shelter a family. His mind raced, images of empty rooms, of walls that remembered no laughter, of a structure whose purpose was something far more ancient than any human habitation. The next phrase appeared. The house was built to hold the door closed. A cold wind slipped the crack that had formed, the draft carrying with it a faint scent of old stone, a reminder that the house was as old as the earth itself. The floor lifted again, the boards rising as though the earth beneath them were pushing upward. Each movement accompanied by a low, resonant hum that reverberated through his bones. He felt a tremor travel up his spine, a subtle vibration that seemed to echo the house's own heartbeat. The notebook's final line for this passage seeped onto the page in a thick, almost black ink. The door is opening because you open the house. A sudden, sharp crack split the floorboards near his feet, a thin fissure that widened just enough for a glimpse of unfathomable darkness to be seen. The opening was not wide enough for any human shape, but it was a portal into something older than the house's timbers. He stared into the gap, the darkness beyond it swallowing the pale light from the window, a void that seemed to pulse with an unseen life. The house seemed to hold its breath, the silence after crack heavier than any sound could be. His heart hammered, each beat a reminder that the weight of the house pressed upon him from all sides. He closed a notebook, the pages rustling softly, as if the book itself were sighing in relief at being put to rest for a moment. Chapter 10, The Listening Below. The house had altered its breathing. Until now, the structure had sounded old and ordinary. Wood creaked, dust shifted, time whispered through the beams, as it always does in forgotten buildings. Now each sound carried intention, each creak a word, each sigh a sentence. The broken floor beneath the table remained lifted, the wood bending upward around a thin opening that led to a darkness that seemed deeper than any hole he had ever imagined. Soil had collected in uneven piles across the boards, as if the earth itself were leaking into the room, a slow, patient tide. He sat, the notebook heavy in his lap, his breath shallow, his mind trying to process the cascade of warnings that had etched themselves onto the paper. Silence had ceased to be an absence. It had become a presence that listened, that waited for his next move. The opening beneath the floor barely revealed any shape, but the darkness within seemed to possess depth, a void that stretched far beyond the reaches of the house's foundations. The faint blackness appeared to move, to breathe, as if it were a living cavity. A soft, low sound rose from below, not a scrape this time, but gentle sigh, like the exhale of a sleeping giant. The wind that rose to the crack carried a faint mineral scent, the smell of earth that had never known daylight. The notebook's ink formed new sentences, each line appearing with a deliberate slowness that mirrored the house's patient rhythm. The buried one does not rise immediately. He read the next words, their weight palpable. First it listens to the living. A tremor traveled to floorboards, a subtle vibration that felt like the house's own pulse, a rhythmic thrum that seemed to match his own heartbeat. He inhaled, feeling the cold air draw down to the narrow opening, the chill sliding over his skin like a ghost's touch. The following line arrived, the ink thick and deliberate. It waits to understand the voice that woke it. He could feel the darkness below shifting its attention upward, as if something ancient were turning its ear to the vibrations of his own breath. The air grew colder, the breath from below swelling, then receding in a slow, deliberate pattern, each exhale a soft pressure on his chest. The notebook continued. Everything buried eventually learns to listen. A faint, distant sound rose from the hallway above, the echo of a footfall that seemed far removed from his own. The house seemed to hear it and respond with a soft groan, the timbers acknowledging the presence of those above. He felt a faint vibration travel up to the wood, a gentle tug that pulled at his awareness, urging him to focus on the soft rhythm of the house's breathing. The next sentence appeared, the ink darker than before. When it hears you clearly. He waited, his eyes locked on the narrow crack, his pulse echoing the low hum that rose from the darkness below. A soft, drawn-out sigh rose from the opening, the sound similar to an inhalation that lasted far longer than any human breath. The final line of the passage completed itself, each letter searing the page like a brand. It will begin shaping the darkness to match you. The house seemed to shiver, the wooden boards trembling as if something within the earth had taken its very outline and begun to press it against the cold stone. A distant scraping sound returned, this time fainter, like a fingernail dragging across a stone floor deep below. The rhythm was slow, intentional, the sound of something moving deliberately through darkness. He lowered his head, the notebook resting heavy on his lap, the ink now dry but the words still vibrating in his mind. A faint pressure rose from the opening, a gentle pull that seemed to tug at his thoughts, urging him to consider the shape he might take if the house were to mold the darkness to his likeness. He felt the weight of the unknown pressing against his spine, the house's intention becoming a physical force that seemed to wrap around his ribs. The silence that followed was not empty. It was a waiting, a held breath that promised more revelations, more riddles, more darkness waiting to be shaped. Chapter 11, The Mouth of the Earth. The breath from below did not leave the room. Cold air rose through the cracked boards, a slow, dense fog that settled around the table like a veil. It carried the scent of deep soil and something older still, a dry, mineral perfume that belonged to places untouched by sunlight for centuries. He felt a thin, cold stream cross his hands, the air moving across his skin not as wind, but as a deliberate inhalation from the earth itself, as if the ground below it opened its lungs and was drawing the night into the house. The floor remained lifted, the narrow gap widening just enough for darkness to become a shape rather than a void. From within the blackness, a faint outline began to emerge, a silhouette that seemed to coalesce slowly, its edges softening like a dream forming in the mind's eye. He stared, his breath shallow, as the shape beneath the boards took on a vague form. The earth below was not a simple hollow. It was a cavity that had been carved long ago, a space designed to hold something that the house intended to keep hidden. The notebook's ink once again began to flow, the letters appearing with deliberate slowness that matched the house's patient rhythm. The buried one learns through breath. He read the next line, the ink darker, each stroke deliberate. The cold air draws the living down to understand them. A thin, steady exhalation rose in the opening, the breath moving upward, filling the room with the chill of subterranean air. The temperature fell, the wood of the table cooling under his fingertips, the air growing thin enough that each inhalation felt like a small gasp. The page continued. It breathes the living to understand them. A deeper pull rose from the darkness, a sensation of pressure that seemed to press against his chest, as if the earth were trying to imprint its rhythm upon his own heartbeat. He felt the air move again, a slow, deliberate draw that seemed to stir the dust particles into a gentle whirlwind that danced around the notebook. The ink formed another sentence, the letters thick with urgency. Every living thing carries a pattern. He read on. Once it learns a pattern. The line halted, the ink drying before completing the thought, as if the writer had been interrupted. A faint, steady vibration rose through the floorboards, a subtle tremor that seemed to echo the rhythm of the breath coming from below. It was as though the house itself was listening to the pulse of the earth, matching it beat for beat with his own heart. He felt a shiver travel down his spine, the cold air from the opening wrapping around him like a cloak of night. The next line appeared, the ink darker than any before. It will begin shaping the darkness to match you. A soft, distant sound of scraping would float up from the deeper chambers, the sound of something moving slowly, deliberately, through ancient tunnels. He pressed his palm against the notebook, feeling the paper's texture, rough, worn, as if it had been handled by many hands over countless years. The air grew still for a moment. Then a faint whisper rose in the darkness, a voice that seemed to come from the earth itself. Not human, not animal, but resonance that carried the weight of ages. You are the memory now. The word settled into the room like a stone dropped into a still pond, the ripples traveling outward, touching the walls, the floor, his own thoughts. He lifted his eyes to the opening, the darkness within now taking on a faint, humanoid outline, shoulders, a torso, a head, still indistinct, but undeniably shaped. The house seemed to lean in, the beams creaking softly as if curious about the form taking shape beneath it. A low, resonant hum rose from the opening, the sound of earth shifting, of stone grinding against stone, a deep vibration that seemed to sink into his bones. He closed the notebook with a soft thud, the leather cover sighing against the wood. The house held its breath, waiting for his next move, for the darkness to decide whether it would claim him or whether he would become its voice. Chapter 12. The First Reflection. The silhouette that emerged from the soil did not spring upward in a rush. It rose as though pulled by an unseen tide, each inch of movement deliberate, measured, like a tide that knows the shore shape. The earth beneath the boards yielded slowly, allowing the dark mass to take on a more defined profile. First, a faint ridge suggested a forehead, then a hollow where eyes should be, then a curve that hinted at a brow. He watched, his breath shallow, as the form grew. The soil around the emerging face shifted, grains falling away like rain shedding itself, revealing a further contour, a nose whose bridge seemed carven from the same stone that held the house's foundations. The lower part of the face, a mouth, remained a narrow slit, the edges still soft with earth, as if the dark had been molded by a hand that had never learned the art of finish line. The house's timbers creaked once, a low protest as the weight above adjusted to the new pressure, but the sound was quickly swallowed by the deeper, endless hush of the cavity. A thin line of light from the hallway above slipped through the gap, touching the emerging cheek with a cold, metallic gleam that seemed to set the soil's surface on fire for a heartbeat before it faded. He felt the oppressive stillness behind him loosen, as if the very atmosphere acknowledged the birth of something that had never been meant to exist in a house of wood and plaster. The shape above the earth was now unmistakably human, though still unfinished. Each feature sketched in coarse strokes by a creator who only knew how to carve a memory, not a likeness. The notebook, still clasped in his trembling hands, filled itself with new ink, each letter appearing slowly, as though the writer were aware that a witness was present in the room. It begins with imitation. He read on, the words press into his mind like a weight. The form that rises from beneath the floor will first copy the one who awakened it. A faint, mournful sigh rose from the opening, the breath of the earth itself, as if the soil were inhaling the scene it was forced to produce. The sound seemed to echo the idea of an endless, stubborn perseverance, an echo of the house's own steadfastness, a quality that would later be remembered in a name. The next line arrived, the ink thicker, the strokes heavier. The first shape will always bear the outline of its creator. A tremor passed through the floorboards, a subtle shudder that resonated through his spine. He could almost feel the house's acceptance of the new presence, the way old timber embraces a change after centuries of stillness. His eyes traveled back to the half-formed face, now bearing a faint resemblance to his own, an uncanny echo of his own cheekbones, the angle of his jaw, the scar he carried on his left temple. The shape's mouth remained a thin line, the soil still clinging to its edges, as though the darkness were hesitant to speak. The notebook's final sentence for this page swelled across the page like a tide receding. When the imitation finishes, the door will widen enough for speech. A sudden, soft crack sounded from above, the boards near the ceiling settling under the shifting weight. The house seemed to whisper that the next stage was near, that a voice would soon be summoned from the depths. He stared, his pulse thudding against his ribs, as the dark form's lips twitched, the soil around them pulling back ever so slightly, as if the shape were testing the possibility of sound. The silence that followed was not empty. It thrummed with the promise of a future utterance, a promise that would soon be broken by the first syllable spilling from the earth. Chapter 13, The Voice Without Air. The mouth beneath the floor remained a shallow crack, the soil around it stubbornly clinging, as though it feared the release of breath. The first attempt at speech was a hesitation, a trembling of the earth that sounded less like a voice and more like a shudder of dust through a forgotten tunnel. He felt the temperature drop further, the air around the opening growing colder, as if the darkness itself were drawing inward, reluctant to let any sound escape. The soil surface cracked infinitesimally, the edges of the thin mouth parting just enough to allow a faint movement of air to pass. The notebook's ink, as if compelled by the same unseen force that moved the earth, wrote, "It does not yet understand sound." The next line arrived, the script hurried, the letters trembling. Voices belong to the living. A faint ripple traveled through the soil, a barely perceptible vibration that seemed to be the earth's own attempt at inhalation. The house's beams shivered in response, as though they, too, were listening for something that might never be. The mouth opened a fraction wider, the soil around it shifting, the dark inside the cavity seeming to inhale, then exhale a breath that stirred the dust on the floorboards. The sound that emerged was not a word but a low, broken resonance, a wail that rode the frequency of a dying wind. He heard, at the edge of perception, a sound that resembled his own voice and timbre, but it was fractured, as though a mirror had shattered the reflection and only fragments returned. The darkness below seemed to be learning the shape of the syllable, to feel its weight, to try and hold it. The notebook continued, the ink now a deep, urgent black. It must learn the voice by listening. An almost imperceptible pressure brushed the back of his neck, a feather-light touch that felt like the house's own breath brushing his skin. The pressure seemed to come from the opening, as if the darkness were reaching toward him, yearning to copy the cadence he produced. He whispered a single word, his own voice a low, careful utterance. Name. The sound traveled down the passage, reverberating off the stone walls, returning as a faint echo that was almost lost in the hiss of the earth shifting. The notebook's final line for this passage formed slowly, each letter a deliberate strike. When it speaks your voice, it will call you down to it. A thin, mournful howl rose from the opening. The sound of wind forced through a narrow crack, as though the earth itself were trying to sing, but could not find the proper pitch. The house's old boards groaned, the creak echoing like a sigh of resignation. He felt a cold draft wash over his face, the air moving upward from the darkness, wrapping around his throat, making him choke momentarily. The darkness below seemed to tighten, as if trying to compress the shape of his words, to shape them into a mouthful that could be released. The page in his hands trembled, the notebook's pages fluttering as though a faint breeze stirred them from within. The ink bled across the paper, a dark stain that reminded him of the soil that clung to his fingers. He realized that the darkness was not merely a void. It was a patient listener, a patient learner, a patient friend that had been waiting beneath the house for someone to give a voice. The house let out a low, resonant hum, the sound of timber flexing under the weight of something unseen, a hum that seemed to affirm that the process was unfolding exactly as it had been intended for countless generations. Chapter 14, The Name Beneath the Floor. The faint sound that rose from the opening was no longer a broken howl. It had sharpened into a recognizably human timbre, though still rough around the edges. The voice carried his own cadence of speech, but each syllable was filtered through the soil, each word emerging as though spoken through a layer of damp earth and ancient stone. He heard the first syllable of his own name, the sound thin and distorted, yet unmistakable in its rhythm. Ka! The second syllable followed, the voice gaining confidence as the soil seemed to relax around it. Lead. The two sounds merged, forming a fragmented echo of his own name, a name that meant eternal, a truth that now hung in the stale air of the room like a promise. He felt the cold air from below tighten around his throat, the pressure of the voice urging him to listen more closely. The house's beams vibrated in sympathy, each timbre of the earth's breath echoing through the floorboards. The notebook, still clutched tight, filled itself with another warning, the ink flowing in a deliberate, shaky hand. Do not answer when it speaks. He could feel his own heart race at the command, the awareness that a voice from the depths was already testing his obedience. The voice beneath the floor opened again, the syllable ka, repeating, this time clearer. The second half led resonating with a strange echo that seemed to tap against the walls of his mind. He heard the second syllable of his name stretch into the next syllable of the next name, one that meant glorious, the dark utterance forming a second word, Mag. The sound cracked, its edges rough as a stone that formed the passage, then steadied into D. The two names, Khalid and Majdi, floated together in the stale, cold air, each carrying its own weight, eternal endurance, glorious purpose. A tremor ran through the floorboards, the house seemingly acknowledging the resonance of the two names. The air grew colder still, the breath from below a thin veil that wrapped around his jaw, reminding him of the gift-bearing nature of the opening, an offering of a name, a gift that the earth granted to those who dared to listen. The notebook's next line grew darker, the ink blotting the page. If you answer it, it will know where you belong. The voice rose again, now forming a third name, its tones warm yet distant. Ah! The final syllable followed, the resonance deepening. Mad. His own name, Ahmed, meaning praiseworthy, now echoed from the depth, as though the earth itself was acknowledging a virtue the house had long coveted. A thin, cold breath lifted from the opening, a whisper that seemed to twine the three names together, an invisible thread that bound him, the house, and the darkness in a single unbreakable knot. He felt a sudden, sharp pressure on the back of his neck, an unseen hand pushing his thoughts toward compliance. The house's old boards gave a soft, resonant creak, as if the structure itself were voicing a warning. The notebook, its pages now damp with the breath of the earth, wrote a final, stark line. The buried one cannot climb upward alone. A thin crack in the floor widened minutely, the darkness below seeming to swell, as if the earth were preparing to receive the rest of his identity, ready to claim the friend it had patiently awaited. The voice below moved again, the syllables of his name, sounding now with a faint, hopeful tremor. Khaled, Magdi, Ahmad. Each utterance seemed to vibrate through his bones, a reminder that the dark beneath held his eternal, glorious, praiseworthy selves, ready to be woven into its own memory. He swallowed, his throat dry, his mind racing with images of doors that opened not with hinges, but with whispered names, doors that remembered the weight of a gift given long ago, doors that stood steadfast against the erosion of time. The house settled, the beams sighing in unison, a soft, mournful hymn that seemed to echo the name spoken in the darkness. Chapter 15. The Hunger of the Hollow. The voice from below now spoke his name with a rhythm that felt like a chant, each repetition a step deeper into a ritual the house had performed for generations. The first syllable Ka arrived, followed by then Mag, D, then Mad. The cadence grew steadier, the trembling in the soil less pronounced, as if the darkness were learning the tone, the timbre, the exact inflection of his speech. Each iteration carried a faint echo of the gift the earth had offered, a name, a memory, a piece of identity to be consumed and reshaped. The breath from the opening rose in a slow, pulsing wave, the air moving upward like a tide that never fully receded. The notebook, now warm from his hand, filled itself with a new warning, the letters forming in a tighter hand. It has begun remembering you. He read the next sentence, the ink darker than before. Every word it repeats feeds its hunger. A cold surge rushed through his chest, the sensation of being watched not only by the house but by the darkness itself, a presence that seemed to hunger for more than just sound. It craved the very essence of his being. The voice rose again, the syllables now blending together, forming a seamless string of his names. Khalid Maji Ahmed. The sound vibrated through floorboards, each note striking the wood like a hammer upon an anvil, a resonant call that seemed to echo through the house's very core. He felt the air around him thicken, the pressure from below growing, as though the earth were pulling his breath into the opening, trying to draw him closer to the source of the voice. The notebook's ink bled across the page in a hurried script, the words etched with urgency. The buried one grows stronger with every word. Another line followed, the letters as sharp as the crack in the floor. Language feeds it. A faint rumble rose from the darkness, the sound of stones shifting, of old roots moving in the soil, an ancient movement that seemed to respond to speech, as if the very ground were alive and thirsty. He felt a subtle shift in the temperature, the air near the opening becoming warmer, the heat a contrast to the cold that had dominated the room. The warmth seemed to come from the gift the earth was offering, a momentary comfort before the darkness reclaimed it. The voice from below now spoke his name with a lyric quality, each syllable flowing into the next. Khalid, Majdi, Ahmed. The cadence was slow, deliberate, as though the darkness were savoring each vowel, each consonant, drinking in the way a thirsty creature drinks a drop of water. The notebook's next passage arrived, the ink thick and heavy. It does not yet understand sound. The following line, written with a shaking hand, read, "Voices belong to the living." The air grew still for a heartbeat, the house seemingly holding its breath, waiting for the next movement of the dark. Then, without warning, the voice announced a new word, simple, ubiquitous, spoken countless times each day. Come. The word reverberated through the opening, a thin, hollow echo that seemed to vibrate the very fibers of the wooden floor. The request was not a command, but a pleading invitation, a beckoning that seemed to come from the core of the earth itself, urging him to step closer, to give himself fully to the darkness. The notebook's final line for this chapter spread across the page like a warning carved into stone. The first invitation is never the last. Another soft, mournful sound rose from the opening, the breath from below swelling again, the air moving upward with gentle force. As if the dark were exhaling the words it had just spoken, he felt the weight of the floorboards shift beneath his feet, the wood giving slightly as if acknowledging the invitation. The house's beams creaked in sympathy, a low, resonant moan that seemed to echo the friendship that had been forged between the living and the unseen. The darkness beneath the floor seemed to smile, an invisible grin formed by the shape of the opening widening a fraction more, the soil giving a little more space for the voice to travel. He realized that the house had become a steady, steadfast keeper of this ritual, a keeper of echoes that would never cease as long as someone paused above the hollow and dared to listen. He steadied himself, his hand gripping the edge of the table, his eyes fixed on the widening crack, the breath from below swirling upward, carrying his name, his memory, his eternal presence into a place that would never forget. Chapter 16, The Shape of the Door. The timber that had once supported the ceiling now bent in a slow, inexorable arc, as though the building itself were learning to breathe a different way. The crack in the floor widened not by a sudden rupture, but by the patient push of compacted earth, the soil heaving upward until the opening formed a true portal rather than a mere fissure. From the widening gap, a shape began to take form. First, a bulge of compacted dirt rose, smoothing itself into what looked like a torso. The weight of the earth settled into a pair of shoulders that widened, the grain of the timber groaning softly as the unseen mass pressed against the joists. A faint outline of a neck appeared, the curvature deliberate, the angle of the head beginning to resolve in the dim light that filtered through the hallway above. The house seemed aware of the transformation. The old beams creaked in a rhythm that matched the heartbeat of the emerging figure, each tremor a silent acknowledgement that a door was being fashioned from stone and memory. The opening grew tall enough that a silhouette could stand within it without touching surrounding boards, a space that could contain a body, a mind, an intention. The notebook, its pages already slick with the chill of the underground, filled itself once more. The ink brushed the paper in a hurried hand. The house was built to keep the door closed. The next line arrived, letters jagged as a stone that now defined a new doorway. Every crack is a promise of passage. A low, resonant hum rose from the cavity, a tone that seemed to vibrate through the wooden floor, through the dust that hung in the air, through the very bones of the building. It was not a sound of terror, but a solemn toll, like a bell marking commencement of a rite that had waited centuries to be performed. From within the opening, a faint glow began to leak, the pale light of the house's interior catching on the surface of the forming shoulders, making the soil glint like wet stone. The shape's arms, still hidden beneath the earth, flexed as if testing the limits of their newfound freedom. He felt a pressure in his chest, the same pressure that had urged his breath upward in previous chapters, now amplified as the doorway took on a more complete anatomy. The house's floorboards shivered beneath his feet, the motion subtle but unmistakable, each board accommodating the increasing mass above it. The next sentence in the notebook was scribed with a deliberate, heavy stroke. When the portal opens, the echo of a name will be heard on both sides. A thin line of dust floated down from the ceiling, spiraling lazily before settling on the floor, a reminder that time still moved, even as the house prepared to transition from a keeper of secrets to a conduit for them. He watched as the shape's head rose fully, the contour of a face becoming visible through the darkness. The cheekbones were pronounced, the jaw set, the mouth, still a narrow slit, began to soften, the edges of soil peeling away as if to reveal a mouth ready to speak. The house seemed to inhale one final, deep breath, the old timbers sighing in unison, and then, as if on cue, the doorway widened a fraction more, enough to allow a single hand to slip through, a hand that had been waiting in the darkness of millennia to taste the light. A single word drifted upward from the opening, the syllables clear and resonant. "Come." The house answered with a soft, lingering creak, a sound that felt like an ancient promise being fulfilled. The page in his notebook trembled as if the paper itself were aware of the moment, the ink smearing just a little, as if the house were leaving its own mark upon the record of events. The doorway now stood fully formed, a passage carved from earth and timber, an aperture through which the house could finally exchange its hidden self with the world above. Chapter 17. The Voice That Leaves the Mouth. The mouth that had once been a thin crack began to expand, the soil that clung to its edges giving way like parchment under the press of a stylus. The opening widened enough to reveal a set of teeth, blackened by centuries of mineral deposits. Yet the expression carried no malice, only a strange, patient expectation. From within the cavern, a voice rose, and it was no longer an imitation of his own timbre. The sound resonated with his exact cadence, the same measured inflection he used when he whispered himself in moments of doubt. Yet it was as if the darkness had taken his voice, polished it, and returned it as a separate entity. He heard the first full sentence, spoken from the depths. "I'm coming." The phrase hung in the stale air, reverberating off the walls of the house, each syllable striking the wood like a soft hammer. The voice was no longer rough, no longer broken. It flowed as effortlessly as his own breath when he exhaled slowly at night. The notebook's page fluttered, the ink forming a new entry with a hand that seemed steadier than any before. When the echo becomes a voice, the house knows you are heard. The next line appeared, the letters forged a force that matched the certainty of the spoken words. The darkness will answer with a mirror of your tone. A subtle vibration traveled up through the floorboards, a tremor that seemed to tremble in rhythm with the voice he had just heard. It was as though the house itself were listening, cataloging each inflection, each rise and fall of pitch, storing it like a librarian preserving a rare manuscript. The voice continued, a second sentence spilling forth with the same calm assurance. "I have learned your name, and I carry it within the soil." He felt a chill crawl up his spine, the sensation of something ancient and patient embracing his most intimate identifier. The house's beams shivered, the old wood sighing as if relieved to finally give voice to the secret it had guarded. The notebook offered one more warning. "The ink dark as midnight. Do not mistake the echo for a friend until you've seen the hand that holds it." The words settled into his mind like dust on a bookshelf. A reminder that the voice, though familiar, belonged to a presence that had never breathed air above the ground. Beyond the doorway, the shape now fully defined, a silhouette of shoulders, a torso, a head, stood upright. The darkness that had filled the cavity receded just enough to reveal the contours of a being that mirrored his own, but whose skin was the color of ancient stone, the eyes vacant wells of night. A final utterance rose, a gentle, almost reverent lilt that seemed to thank him for the invitation. "Your patience has been the key." The house answered with a soft groan, the sound traveling through the joists like a sigh of relief. The page in his notebook curled at the edges, the ink dry but the meaning still resonant. He realized that the voice that now filled the room was no longer a phantom, but a reflection that had been forged in the crucible of earth, a mirror of his own spirit, ready to step through the doorway he had unwittingly created. Chapter 18. The Pull Beneath the Skin. A strange tug began at the base of his spine, a faint pressure that seemed to come from the very soil beneath his feet. It was not a pain, but a subtle invitation, a magnetic attraction that urged his chest to rise and his shoulders to tilt forward. The feeling spread slowly, like a tide that nudged a solitary stone toward the shore. His breath grew shallow, each inhalation pulling the cool air from the opening above, each exhalation feeling as though it were being drawn into the earth below. The sensation was simultaneous and contradictory, air moving both upward and downward, as if his lungs were a conduit between two worlds. He found his arms moving of their own accord, his hands reaching toward the dark doorway, the fingers flexing as though guided by an unseen puppeteer. The pressure increased just enough to make his heart thud against his ribs, a rhythmic reminder that the house was now part of his own rhythm. The notebook's pages, still damp from his earlier grip, bore a fresh line, letters forming in a tremulous hand. "The pull will draw you nearer the source of the voice." The following sentence arrived, ink blotting the paper with a heavier stroke. "Your body will answer before your mind can protest." A soft creak rose from the floorboards beneath his knees, the wood sighing as if someone else were stepping across them, though his own feet remained planted. The house seemed to flex in response, the joist shifting minutely, creating an almost imperceptible give that allowed him to lean forward a fraction more. He felt the muscles in his back lengthen, the vertebrae aligning in a way that mirrored the shape rising from the earth. The pull grew stronger, not as a force of violence, but as a patient persuasion, coaxing his posture into an arc that matched the curvature of the doorway he had just fashioned. A new line etched itself on the page, the letters spaced deliberately, as if the writer were marking each word with an extra beat. When the skin feels the earth's invitation, the spirit will follow. The ink smeared slightly, the pressure of his hand shaking as the words formed, echoing the tremor that moved through his own flesh. He could hear the faint susurrus of soil shifting around the doorway, a sound like sand slipping through cupped hands, each grain moving in response to the magnetic draw, rearranging itself to accommodate the shape that now stood within it. The house's ceiling above them gave a low, resonant sigh, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of generations, a gentle reminder that this building had heard countless cries, countless whispers, and now was hearing his. The pull intensified, his chest expanding as if the air itself were a living thing, each breath a negotiation between the house above and the earth below. He felt his shoulders rise and fall, a motion that was both voluntary and compelled, a dance choreographed by the unseen force that now held his very marrow in gentle, ironclad fingers. The final line on this page was written with a hand that seemed to tremble with reverence. The body shifts, the mind watches, the house remembers. The ink bled into the fibers of the paper, the words remaining stark against the pale background, a testament to the moment when flesh and foundation converged. He stood, half leaned forward. The doorway framed his silhouette, his breath a thin thread that wove between the wooden rafters above and the stone walls below. The house, the earth, his own body, all three now performed a single, ancient ritual of invitation and acceptance. Chapter 19, The Second Self. A sudden, unmistakable shift rippled to the narrow hallway, the air thickening as if a curtain of fog had descended upon the space between the two worlds. The shape that rose from the earth had completed its formation. The dark shoulders, the carved torso, the head now bore a face that was his own in every detail, from the set of his eyebrows to the faint scar that traced his left cheek. He stared at the reflected image, his own eyes widened in the dim light, the pupils dilating as if to drink an impossible sight. The mirror image smiled faintly, a smile that was his but did not belong to him, a perturbing blend of familiarity and alienation. The notebook's pages fluttered once more, ink racing across the paper in a hurried hand. The echo becomes a twin. The following sentence arrived, letters formed with a confident, deliberate stroke. Two bodies, one memory. A low, resonant thrum traveled to the floor, the old joists vibrating in harmony with the heartbeat. He could now feel in two chests simultaneously. The sound was not a clash, but a harmonious chord, as if the house were a grand organ playing a single note on two pipes. He felt an uncanny pressure at the base of his neck, a light but insistent drag, as if the pair of bodies were tethered by an invisible cord of memory. The sensation was subtle, not painful, merely an awareness that the space between the two silhouettes was a thin veil of shared existence. The next line in the notebook was scribed with a hand that seemed steadier than any before. When the twin gazes, the house sees both. He raised his hand, instinctively mirroring the movement of the figure opposite him. The twin lifted its own hand, the motion perfectly synchronized, the fingers aligning as if the two were one. The air between them shivered, the light from the hallway above catching briefly on the twin's cheekbone, casting twin shadows upon the floor. The house responded with a soft creak, a sound that seemed to echo the duality of the moment. It was as though the building itself recognized the duplication, acknowledging the existence of two entities sharing the same foundation. Another sentence formed on the page, ink heavy with significance. The reflection bears the same wounds, the same hopes. He felt a twinge in his own left temple, a familiar ache that the twin mirrored instantly, a reminder that the duplication went beyond mere appearance. It encompassed the lived experiences, the scars, the triumphs that defined him. A faint, almost imperceptible hum rose from the doorway, the sound of the earth shifting as if it were pleased with its own handiwork. The twin's mouth opened, the thin line of soil that once defined it now receding, revealing teeth that matched his own, a set that had never known the taste of fresh air. The notebook recorded one final line for this chapter, the ink flowing in a smooth, decisive line. The house remembers each face, each story, and now holds two. The twin spoke, a voice that matched his own timbre perfectly, yet carried an echo of stone. "I am you and you are me," he answered, his voice trembling with the realization that the dialogue was now a conversation between mirrors, each word reverberating through the timber and stone alike. The house seemed to inhale, a deep, resonant sigh that shook the rafters, as though it were taking a collective breath for both occupants of the room. The twin's eyes, his eyes, glimmered with faint, otherworldly light, a glint that suggested an awareness beyond the bounds of flesh. He understood then that the duplication was not a curse, but a profound transformation. The house had taken his essence and given it form, a second self that would carry his memory forward even as the original might someday be reclaimed by the earth. Chapter 20. The third step. The tension in the room tightened like a drawn bow, the wood of the floorboards creaking in anticipation of the final movement. The twin stood beside him, mirroring his posture, each muscle primed for the decisive action that would complete the ritual the house had orchestrated for generations. He felt the pull once more, this time not a gentle tug, but a firm guidance, the earth beneath the floor urging his weight forward. He shifted his weight onto his right foot, his left heel lifting off the ground, the motion smooth and deliberate. The notebook, its pages now stained with a faint scent of soil, bore a new inscription, the ink dark as midnight. The third step opens a passage. The subsequent line arrived, the letters spaced carefully, as if each word were a stepping stone. When a foot crosses the threshold, the world above and below will converge. He took a breath, the air from the opening above filling his lungs in a thin, cool rush, the sensation of two worlds colliding within a single inhalation. The floor beneath him trembled, a low, resonant rumble that rose from the house's foundation, as if the building were acknowledging the culmination of the process. His left foot moved forward, the heel touching the worn with just beyond the widened crack. A sharp metallic scent rose from the seam, a fleeting reminder that iron fastenings, long forgotten, still lay hidden within the joists. The house let out a sigh, a long, mournful creak that seemed to echo through every beam and nail, a sound that was both a lament and a celebration. The twin mirrored the motion, its foot landing beside his, the two pairs of boots aligning perfectly on the aged floor. The notebook's final line for this movement was etched with steady hand, the ink forming a stark, unyielding sentence. Now the reflection must stand, and the door will finally close behind the living. The doorway, now fully formed, seemed to pulse with a faint, internal light, the darkness within receding just enough for a glimpse of the room beyond. He could see the shallow stairs that led deeper into the earth, the passage spiraling further down like a throat waiting to swallow. He felt the weight of the earth pulling at his chest, a gentle pressure that reminded him of the tide that had drawn him to shore. The twin placed his hand upon his shoulder. The contact warmed despite the surrounding cold, a gesture that conveyed both solidarity and an unspoken farewell. He whispered, his voice barely audible over the creaking of the house. "I am the one who opened the door." The twin answered in the same tone, the echo of his words resonating through the timber. "And I am the one who will keep it." A final, low groan rose from the beams, a vibration that traveled through the entire structure, the sound of wood and stone settling into a new equilibrium. The doorway began to close slowly, the board shifting inward as if drawn by an invisible magnet, sealing the passage behind them while leaving the opening above just wide enough for a sliver of light to slip through. He felt his own heartbeat slow, the rhythm aligning with the house's own pulse, a synchronous thrum that signified the completion of the ancient cycle. The twin silhouette faded gradually, the stone-colored flesh melting into the darkness, leaving only the faint outline of shadow that hinted at the shape of a man. He stood alone in the room, the notebook clutched to his chest. The house around him hushed as if holding its breath. The floor beneath his feet was solid once more, the cracks sealed. The doorway now a solid wall of timber and stone, a barrier that had been both a portal and a prison. A soft, lingering note rose from the house, a sound that seemed to vibrate through his very bones, a reminder that the structure remembered every footstep, every whispered name, every choice made in its shadows. He understood that the house would keep the door closed until another seeker arrived, that the cycle would begin anew, and that his own story, etched in the pages of the notebook, would become part of the house's endless archive. He closed the notebook gently, the cover creaking faintly, and placed it back on the table, the pages now still. The house settled into a quiet that was not empty, but full of the memory of all that had passed through its walls. The night outside deepened, the moon casting a thin silver line across the shattered windows, and the house, ever patient, waited beneath the stars for the next footfall that would awaken its ancient hunger once more. Chapter 21. The Eyes That Arrived Last. The darkness that curled around the opening had begun to soften, as though the soil itself were folding inward to form a new surface. From the deeper chamber a pair of hollows emerged, the outlines of eyes that had been waiting for centuries beneath the house's foundation. They were vacant at first, smooth and black, a void that seemed to drink the thin light that filtered down to the cracked boards. He watched, his breast shallow, as fine threads of earth drifted away, exposing the darker curve of the sockets. Slowly, the edges of the hollows darkened, the shadows deepening until the shape that rose from the earth now bore a face fully formed, cheekbones, nose, mouth, all traced in the same stone-gray tone as the surrounding soil. The only difference between this emergent visage and his own was the absence of color. The eyes were twin pits of night, perfectly still, reflecting nothing but the dim glow of the attic window far above. The notebook, still pressed against his chest, began to write in a hand that trembled with a mixture of awe and dread. The reflection rises before it can see. The next sentence appeared, letters spaced deliberately, each one a wait. Sight arrives last. A low, resonant creak rose from the joists above, as if the house itself were acknowledging the birth of a new witness. The floorboards beneath his feet shivered, the wood flexing in sympathy with the stillness of the eyes that now stared up at him, empty yet somehow aware. He felt a cold draft slip through the opening, curling around the newly formed brow, as if the earth were offering a breath of its own to the face it had coaxed into being. The darkness of the sockets seemed to pulse faintly, a rhythm that matched the slow thrum of his own heart. The notebook's ink darkened further, forming another warning. The house remembers the shape of what it watches. The line that followed was stark, a stark reminder of the house's patience. The eyes looked forward, but they belonged to the past. A faint vibration traveled through the floor, the sound of something far below shifting, as if ancient roots were moving to accommodate the new presence. The twin hollows stared back at him, unblinking, their emptiness a mirror of his own uncertainty. He raised his hand, the motion automatic, and brushed a fingertip against the cool, rough skin of the earthbound cheek. The contact sent a shiver through the stone, as though the face were remembering the sensation of touch for the first time. The house seemed to sigh, the boards giving a soft, collective exhale. The final words of this page slipped onto the page in a slow, deliberate hand. When the eyes finally open, the door will already be ajar. A single, barely audible click sounded from somewhere behind the walls, the sound of a latch releasing, though no door had yet moved. The darkness behind the eyes deepened, as if the house were holding its breath, waiting for the moment the vision would be granted. He stepped back, the weight of the twin gazes anchoring him to the spot, a reminder that the house had now given him not only a mouth and a voice, but also a witnessing stare that would never forget what had passed beneath its beams. Chapter 22. The Quiet Decision. The room held a tension that seemed to pulse with the slow heartbeat of the house. The figure that had risen from the earth now stood fully formed, its stone-gray skin catching the weak light that slipped through the cracked window. The eyes, still dark pits, stared forward, unmoving, while his own heart hammered against his ribs as if trying to outrun the ticking of an unseen clock. A soft, almost imperceptible rustle rose from the far corner of the room, the sound of a single piece of paper turning in a draft that came from nowhere. It was a notebook, its pages flickering as if breathing. The ink began to move again, each letter forming with a deliberate weight that seemed to echo the gravity of the moment. Which one is supposed to stay? The line that followed was written in a slower, almost mournful hand. The reflection stood fully upright now. He felt the cold air from the opening brush his throat, a reminder that the darkness still stretched far below, waiting for a decision that would determine which of them would remain bound to the house and which would be allowed to rise. He swallowed, the sound of his own gulp reverberating off the walls, a tiny, human protest against the vast, ancient patience of the building. The house responded with a low groan, the timbers shifting as though they were leaning in to listen. The notebook continued, ink spilling across the page in a confident sweep. The house does not choose. The words that followed arrive in a firm, unyielding script. Only the living can decide who remains. He stared at the twin eyes that regarded him without judgment, their darkness a void that seemed to contain all the forgotten stories of the generations that had lived and died within these walls. He understood that the choice he faced was not merely about staying or leaving. It was about what memory the house would keep alive, and what it would consign to the earth below. A faint shiver ran through the floorboards, the sound of a distant wooden beam settling, as if the house were turning its own ancient gears to accommodate his inevitable decision. The final sentence of the page appeared, the ink thick and unrelenting. And once the choice is made, the door will close behind one of you. A soft click resonated from the doorway, the wood of the threshold moving just enough to suggest a closure that had not yet happened. The darkness beyond the opening seemed constrict, the air growing denser, as if the house were already beginning to seal away what it could no longer bear. He felt a wave of unexpected sorrow wash over him, a tide that rose from the depth of the earth and spilled over his own sense of self. The reflection stood mute, the hollows of its eyes unchanged, as though waiting for his voice to break the stalemate. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the cool, mineral scent of soil, exhaling a breath that seemed to carry a fragment of his own resolve toward the floor. When he opened his eyes again, the notebook lay open on the table, its pages still trembling, ready to record the outcome of his silent deliberation. Chapter 23. The Weight of Being. Silence settled over the room like a heavy blanket, underscored only by the soft rustle of the notebook's pages as they fluttered in the faint draft. The stone-gray figure remained stationary, its posture perfect, the dark pits of its eyes still fixed on the space between them and the open crack in the floor. He felt a pressure settle into his chest, a density that seemed to come from the walls themselves, as if the house were compressing the air around him, urging him to make a choice that would alter the very architecture of his existence. The notebook's ink began again, each stroke deliberate, as though the words themselves were a weight added to the room. The house listened to his hesitation. The following line was scrawled in a tighter hand, the letters packed with urgency. It heard the thrum of his pulse echo through the beams. A low, mournful creak rose from the floorboards, the sound of timber bending under a weight that was invisible yet palpable. He could feel the vibration running up his legs, through the soles of his shoes, into his spine, as if the house itself were measuring the gravity of his decision. The notebook continued, the ink flowing in a slow cascade. The reflection stood, a mirror made of stone, waiting for the verdict. His gaze fell once more upon the empty sockets, the darkness within them a reminder that the house had watched countless lives slip through its doors, each one leaving a hollow behind. He thought of the names that had been spoken in the darkness, Khalid, Majdi, Ahmed, each a thread woven into the fabric of the building's memory. Another line appeared, the letters firm and unyielding. Only one could stay, the other would be forced below. A faint sigh rose from the opening. the air moving upward as the earth itself were exhaling, releasing a breath that seemed to carry the weight of all those who had been buried before. The stone figure's shoulders seemed to lift just a fraction, an involuntary reaction to the unseen pressure of the house's expectation. The notebook's final words of this passage settled onto the page in a deliberate, steady hand. When the decision was made, the floor would settle and the house would remember. A sudden, soft crack split the silence, the line of the floorboard near the doorway widening just enough to reveal a sliver of darkness that seemed to pulse with inner light. The house felt the shift, the beams absorbing the change. The old would sigh in relief as if a long-held tension had finally been released. He felt his own body respond, his muscles relaxing slightly, the weight in his chest easing as though the decision had already taken shape in the very fibers of the house. The stone gray figure seemed to understand, its hollow eyes narrowing as if focusing on an unseen point beyond the physical world. He reached out, his hand hovering above the open crack. Feeling the cool draft that rose from below, the scent of earth and stone mingling with the musty air of the room. The house seemed to pulse in response, a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the timber and into his bones. The notebook lay open, its pages now still, the ink dry but the meaning still hanging in the air like a lingering perfume. He sensed that the moment of decision had already been recorded, that the house's memory would keep the record forever, even if he could not recall every detail in the years to come. Chapter 24, The One the House Remembers. The floorboards settled into their new alignment, the crack that had once gaped like a mouth now narrowed, the timber pressing together as if a giant hand had gently squeezed the boards to close the wound. The house exhaled, a deep, resonant sigh that traveled through every joist, every nail, every grain of wood, as if the building itself were swallowing the memory of what had just transpired. He stood in the center of the room, the stone-gray figure still opposite him, its dark eyes now faintly illuminated by the sliver of light that filtered from the hallway above. The house's atmosphere felt thicker, as though the walls had taken on a new density, a sense of permanence that could only belong to something that had been etched into its core. The notebook, now laying on the table, seemed to pulse with a quiet energy, as if the pages themselves were breathing. The ink on the open page darkened, the letters forming with a gravity that matched the moment. The house does not keep prisoners. The line that followed was written in a steadier hand, each curve of the letters precise. It keeps what belongs to it. A low creak rose from the rafters, the sound of an old beam settling under a new load, the timbers acknowledging the shift in the house's purpose. It felt as though the building was whispering a promise. The memory it kept would be guarded, not for cruelty, but for preservation. Another sentence appeared, the ink spreading like a slow river across the paper. The door was never meant to open. The words that followed arrived with a soft, almost reverent pressure. Curiosity always opens something. He imagined his own younger self, running through the hallway, hands brushing the worn banister, eyes wide with wonder, never realizing the weight of the doorway he was about to disturb. The house had observed that curiosity for generations, each time sealing the portal once the visitor left, only to wait for the next soul whose breath would stir the dust again. The final line on the page settled in bold, deliberate strokes. But once opened, the door must close. A faint, metallic clang rang from somewhere far above, the sound of a distant key turning a lock that had not been used in centuries. The house seemed to shudder, the timber joints flexing as if acknowledging a secret that had been kept hidden for ages. The stone-gray figure shifted its weight, the dark pits of its eyes reflecting a glint of something like understanding, though its mouth remained a thin slit, the shape of its head tilted ever so slightly, as if it were nodding to the truth that the house had finally accepted. He felt a warmth spread across his chest, a comforting pressure that reminded him of a heart that had never been lit but still held the heat of stories told in whispered tones. The house, a sentinel of memory, had now sealed the doorway, but not before embedding his own story within its walls. He closed the notebook gently, the cover sighing as it met the wood of the table, the sound a soft, final note to the chapter that had just concluded. The house stood still, the silence deep and full, as though it were waiting for the next heartbeat that would awaken its ancient corridors once again. Chapter 25. The Descent of Memory. The floor had settled. The crack, now a narrow, seemed barely visible against the aged planks. Yet the echo of the recent closure resonated to the house like a low hum, a lingering vibration that seemed to vibrate the very air. He stood at the edge of the opening, his hands hovering over the darkness that lay beyond, the scent of earth rising up with each breath he drew. A thin line of light from the hallway above slipped down the gap, illuminating the edge of the hollow just enough to reveal a narrow passage that led deeper into the soil. The passage was lined with compacted earth, the walls smooth as if they had been polished by countless feet that had once traversed this hidden route. His heart pounded, each beat a drum that seemed to reverberate through the wooden floorboards and into the stone beneath. The house responded with a series of soft, rhythmic creaks, as though the building itself were measuring the cadence of his resolve. He placed his left foot onto the edge of the passage, the wood beneath his shoe giving a faint, muted click. The pressure from the earth below rose, a subtle suction that tugged at his ankle, as if the ground were inviting him to step forward, to surrender to its ancient pull. The notebook, still open on the table, began to write anew, each letter appearing with a deliberate slowness that mirrored his hesitant movement. The floor beneath him loosened once more, as if remembering a path it had once known. The sentence that followed arrived in a strong, confident hand. The soil, patient as stone, opened a new wound in the house's belly. A soft, distant rumble rose from the depths, the sound of compacted earth shifting, the movement of centuries-old particles finding new places to settle. He felt the floorboard beneath his other foot shudder, the vibration traveling up his spine, a reminder that the house was still alive, still feeling every shift. He took another step, the footfall quiet, the wood yielding just enough to accommodate his weight. The passage widened slightly as he moved, the walls of earth parting to make room for his advance. A faint glow of bioluminescent fungi flickered on the inner surface, casting an eerie greenish hue that danced across the damp stones. The notebook's ink darkened further, the words forming with an almost reverent awe. He entered the hollow that he had once helped create. The next line arrived, letters trembling as if the page itself were a living thing. The memory of the house folded around him, a cloak of timber and stone. A low, mournful sigh escaped the passage, the air moving upward as if the earth were exhaling a breath that had been held for ages. He inhaled, the smell of mineral earth filling his nostrils, the taste of dampness on his tongue. The house seemed to pause, the timbers holding their breath as he disappeared into the darkness. He felt the ground beneath his boots give way just enough to absorb the impact of his weight, the soil yielding like a soft cushion. The walls of the passage were lined with faint hieroglyphic scratches, crude markings etched into the stone by hands long since turned to dust. Some bore the shape of a house, others an arrow pointing downward, as if warning future wanderers of the depth below. The notebook's final entry for this segment settled onto the page with a deliberate slowness. The house remembered the first step and waited for the next. A distant, resonant clang rang out from somewhere above, the sound of metal beams striking stone, a reminder that the surface world continued its endless routine while below. A new memory was being forged. He moved deeper, the passage narrowing until walls pressed against his shoulders, the earth cool against his back. The darkness seemed to thicken, yet the faint glow of the fungi kept the path faintly illuminated, a small beacon in a void that had swallowed countless footsteps before his. The house above, in its quiet patience, seemed to listen to the soft creak of his boots, each step a testament to the living burden he now carried. He felt a strange peace settle over him, a sensation that his descent was not a loss but continuation, a passing of the torch from the living world above to the hidden world below, a handoff that the house had orchestrated since its first timber was placed. He paused at the far end of the passage, the tunnel opening into a larger chamber where the ceiling rose high above, supported by massive stone arches that seemed to have been carved from the very bedrock. In the center of that cavern stood a solitary stone altar, its surface slick with moisture, its edges worn smooth by centuries of reverence. He sensed the weight of countless memories pressing against the stone, an accumulation of names, of breaths, of promises whispered to the darkness. The house, though silent, had given him a place to lay his own story, a repository for his name to be joined with the others that had been etched into its foundation. The notebook trembled in his hand as he turned the page one last time, the ink forming a final, solemn line. He placed his heart upon the stone, and the house kept it for all time. A faint, resonant vibration rose from the altar, the sound of stone humming as if acknowledging his offering. The passage behind him began to close slowly, the earth shifting back into place, sealing the route he had taken, but not before the house recorded his presence in the layers of dust that now settled around his feet. He stood, breath steady, the darkness surrounding him no longer a threat but a sanctuary, a reminder that the house's memory was a living thing, ever growing, ever waiting, always ready for the next footfall that would awaken its ancient, patient heart. Chapter 26. The Memory That Stays Below. The earth sealed the passage behind him with a soft, patient sigh, the soil sliding back into place as if it had never been opened. Above, the house settled into a new equilibrium, its beams absorbing the last tremor of movement like a deep exhale. He stood alone in the darkness, the only light the faint glow of bioluminescent fungi that clung to the walls, their greenish shimmer painting the damp stone in ghostly patterns. He felt the weight of the silence press against his ears, a heavy blanket of stillness that seemed to swallow any lingering sound. The air was thick with the scent of mineral earth, a reminder that he now existed in a realm where time was measured not by sunrise or sunset, but by the slow, inevitable drift of dust particles. The notebook, still open on his lap, began to write again. The ink appeared with the same deliberate slowness that had haunted every previous page. The void below does not forget. The next line arrived, the letters spaced evenly, each one a tiny affirmation of the house's lasting memory. It holds every footstep, every breath, every whispered name. A soft, distant rumble rose from deeper within the earth, a low vibration that traveled up through the stone like the heartbeats of a creature that had lain dormant for centuries. He felt the tremor through the soles of his boots, a subtle reminder that the world below was alive, patient and ever watchful. He took a cautious step forward, the ground beneath his feet giving a faint, yielding give, as if the soil itself were cushioning his tread. The passage opened into a larger chamber, its ceiling soaring high above, supported by massive stone arches that seemed to have been carved from the very bedrock. In the center of that cavern stood a simple stone slab, its surface polished smooth by the countless hands that had touched it over ages. He knelt before the slab, the coolness of the stone seeping through his clothes, the sensation like a quiet reassurance that he was now part of something far older than any living memory. He placed the notebook gently on the slab, the pages fluttering as if sighing with relief at finally finding a place to rest. The ink on the open page shimmered faintly, the words forming with new gravity. Here the house's heart beats in stone. The following sentence arrived, each letter deliberate, as though the house itself were inscribing its own truth. The earth below listens to the rhythm of those who lie upon it. A faint, resonant hum rose from the arches above, a deep tonal vibration that seemed to emanate from the very rock itself. It was a sound without source, a tone that filled the cavern with a feeling of solemn reverence. The echo lingered, weaving through the passages like a thread of memory. He closed his eyes, allowing the hum to wash over him, the vibrations aligning with the quiet thrum of his own pulse. In that moment, he sensed the house's ancient purpose, to remember, pulsing to the stone, through the earth, through his own being. The notebook's ink darkened further, the letters forming with measured certainty. When the living step into the house, the earth below records their tread. The line that followed was simple, yet heavy with implication. And when they leave, the earth keeps their echo. A soft, distant drip began to fall from the ceiling, each drop striking the stone floor with a clear, crystalline note. The sound was a reminder of time's passage, of the slow, inexorable flow that continued whether anyone was there to listen or not. He opened his eyes, the dim light from the fungi casting strange shadows across the slab, the patterns shifting as if the stone itself were breathing. He understood that it had become a link in a chain that stretched far beyond his own lifetime, a conduit for the house's endless recording of those who passed through its doors. The notebook's final line for this portion settled onto the page in a steadfast hand. The house will never be empty, for it lives in the memories it keeps. He placed a hand upon the slab, the stone warm from the lingering hum, and felt a faint pulse, a tiny rhythm that matched his own heartbeat for a heartbeat before fading. It was a reminder that the house, though built of timber and stone, possessed a heartbeat of its own, a hidden life measured in names, in steps, in the quiet breath of the earth below. He rose, the notebook still open on the slab, and left the cavern, the passage sealing behind him once more as the earth reclaimed its space, the darkness closing like a lid on a treasured secret. Chapter 27. The Silence That Watches. Above the foundation, the house continued its ordinary existence. Windows caught the morning light. The front door opened and closed. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Whispers drifted between the walls. Yet beneath the surface, a deeper rhythm persisted, a silent pulse that resonated through the beams, through the joists, through the very soul of the building. He found himself drawn back to the living room, the table now spotless, the chair slightly crooked as before, the notebook lying open as if waiting for his return. The house seemed to inhale as he entered, the old floorboards creaking softly under his weight, a sound that felt like a greeting. He lifted the notebook, the pages still warm from the faint glow of the fungi's memory, and felt an immediate chill as the ink on the page seemed to shift, the words taking on a new urgency. The first line now read, "Time above moves in hours, time below moves in breaths." The next sentence formed with deliberate slowness, each letter a quiet sigh. Above, footsteps marked days, below the earth marched breaths. A faint shiver rippled through the room as the house responded, the walls flexing ever so slightly, the wooden panels resonating with low, almost imperceptible vibration. It was as if the structure itself were acknowledging the paradox of two timelines coexisting within its frame. He read on, the ink darkening. The house watches both worlds, never favoring one over the other. The line that followed arrived in a quieter hand, the words barely pressing the paper. Above, lives are lived. Below, they are remembered. A subtle pressure rose from the floor, a barely audible creak that seemed to come from the very foundation, as though the house were leaning forward to listen more closely. He felt the wood vibrate under his fingertips, a faint hum that ran through his bones. The notebook continued, the sentences forming with a patient rhythm. One footstep above, one breath below. Both are counted in silence. He glanced toward the corner where a faint outline of the stone-gray figure had once stood. The outline was gone, but the space felt charged, as though its presence lingered in the air, a quiet watcher that lingered even when unseen. The final line of this passage settled onto the page, the ink thick and resolute. The house never forgets, even when the world above looks away. A soft sigh rose from the ceiling, the sound of old plaster settling, a gentle reminder that the house itself was a living entity, a keeper of both the visible and the hidden. He closed the notebook, the cover snapping shut with a muted thud, as if sealing the secret of the house's dual memory. He stood in the quiet room, feeling the weight of both worlds pressing upon him, one visible, one invisible, each waiting for his next step. Chapter 28. The house learns to wait. Above the house, life moved in its ordinary rhythm. The sun rose, the wind rattled the shutters, neighbors passed by, children laughed in the street. Below, the earth remained still, the cavernous chambers gathering dust, the stone slab awaiting the next imprint. He found himself drawn once again to the ancient table, the notebook open on a page that seemed to pulse with a faint, inner glow. The words on the page had shifted, the ink forming a new sentence that reflected the house's ever-changing awareness. The house has learned the cadence of patience. The next line arrived, letters spaced with deliberate calm. It watches each footfall, each sigh, each breath, and stores them like amber. A distant, low rumble rose from the foundation. The sound of stones settling, a subtle vibration that traveled to the floorboards and into his spine, a reminder that the house's memory was not static but evolving. He turned the page, the ink flowing in a steady stream. Even the quietest heart leaves a mark on its timbers. Another sentence followed, the handwriting steadier than before. The walls remember the night a storm struck, the day a child fell, the hour a lover whispered. A faint draft slipped through the cracked window, stirring the pages of the notebook, the paper fluttering as if breathing. The house seemed to inhale, the aged beams flexing gently, the sound echoing like a sigh of relief. He read the next line, the ink deepening. It does not rush. It holds each moment like a secret waiting to be told. A soft creak rose in the stairwell, the sound which shifting under a weight that was not there, a phantom movement that seemed to echo the house's patient waiting. The final line of this passage settled onto the paper with a measured calm. Patience is the house's most faithful companion. He closed the notebook, feeling the weight of the words settle like a stone in his pocket. The house behind him seemed to settle, too, the beams aligning, the floorboards easing into a quiet, almost reverent stillness. He stood, the evening light filtering through the windows, casting long shadows that stretched across the worn floor. He sensed the house's quiet heart beating in time with his own, a rhythm that had endured far longer than any single life. Chapter 29. The weight of another footstep. The house's rhythm was broken once more by a new set of footsteps, softer than the previous ones, yet distinct enough to pierce the quiet that had settled over the building. He heard the soft closing of a door somewhere far away, the faint pad of shoes across a hallway, the faint scrape of foot against a rug. He turned his head toward the source, his eyes catching the faint silhouette of a figure emerging from the living room doorway. It was a visitor, a stranger, perhaps drawn by the curiosity that the house seemed to inspire in those who entered its walls. The visitor moved slowly, cautious, as if aware of the house's watchful eyes. The notebook, still open on the table, reflected the newcomer's arrival with a fresh line of ink. A new footstep approaches, tentative and light. The next sentence flowed, the handwriting steady. The house senses a change, the air thickening with anticipation. A soft creak rose from the floorboards beneath the visitor's weight, the wood responding to the pressure of a new pair of shoes. The house's timbers whispered, a low, resonant note that seemed to travel through the walls and settle in his ears. He felt the pull of the old obsession, the urge to watch the visitor's path, to see whether they would notice the hollow plank that lay unnoticed in the hallway shadows. The notebook recorded his thoughts, the ink forming a new warning. Do not let the curious soul step upon the hidden board. The following line appeared, the letters shaped with a quiet urgency. If they do, the house will open again. A subtle vibration traveled up through the floor, a thrumming that seemed to echo the visitor's heartbeat. The house attuned to the rhythm of every newcomer. He watched as the visitor paused, their gaze drifting toward the corner where the old plank rested. Their hand hovered, fingers lightly brushing the dust-covered wood. The moment hanging in the air like a held breath. The notebook's ink darkened, the words arriving with a calm certainty. Sound that started the entire chain of events years before. He felt his own pulse quicken, the house's heartbeat matching his. As a familiar, almost primal, sensation rose within him. The notebook recorded the moment, the ink forming a final line for this chapter. The house opens, and the darkness below awakens once more. A low, resonant rumble rose from deeper in the foundation, the earth shifting as if answering the call, the hollow beneath the floor beginning to widen ever so slightly. He realized that the cycle was endless, a footstep, a crack, A whisper, a door, a memory, a return. The house's patience was only a veil over the certainty that each new visitor would once again be drawn into its secret, its ancient promise. The visitor stood, eyes wide as they sensed a subtle change in the air, a feeling that the house itself was breathing, waiting for the next chapter to be written upon its timbers. The notebook lay open on the table, the ink still glistening, a silent witness to the pattern that had repeated across generations. Chapter 30, The Second Door. The night outside pressed its weight against the cracked panes, but inside the house a quieter tension rose from the floorboards. He heard a second set of footsteps in the hallway, softer than the first, their cadence deliberate and measured, as if the maker of those steps knew exactly where the hidden plank waited. He turned toward the old table, the notebook still lying open, the ink on the page shimmering like a thin film of oil on water. A new line appeared, the letters forming with a slow, purposeful motion. Another footfall finds a board that hums beneath the plank. The next sentence followed, each word pressed onto the paper with a faint tremor. The wood sighs, a hollow echo that summons the dark below. A barely audible creak rose from the floor as the second visitor's shoe pressed against the hidden plank. The sound was a low, resonant thud that seemed to vibrate through the joists, traveling down into the earth like a pulse. He felt the familiar chill rise up his spine, the air around the hidden opening cooling to the temperature of a deep cellar. The notebook's ink deepened, the new passage reading. The board yields, a thin veil between worlds peeled back by curiosity. The next line arrived in a hand that trembled with a mixture of awe and fear. From the darkness below, a shape stirs, drawn toward the faint light above. A soft rustling of soil could be heard, the sound of compacted earth shifting as if it were breathing. The frame of the doorway widened just enough for a sliver of pale air to slip through, carrying the scent of damp mineral stones. He watched as a second silhouette emerged from the opening, its outline barely discernible against the darkness, the figure's shoulders broad, its posture calm, as if it had been waiting for this moment for an eternity. The notebook recorded the scene in a hurried scrawl. The second form bears a mark of the house, a reflection forged in stone. The following sentence was written in a steadier hand, each stroke deliberate. It bears the same scar upon its cheek, the same hollow where the first memory once lingered. A low, resonant hum rose from the depths, the sound weaving to the timber like a slow, mournful chant. The house seemed to lean in, the old beams creaking as they absorbed the reverberation, the air growing thicker with each passing second. He turned his gaze back to the notebook, the page now filled with a warning. Two shadows walk the same floor, and the house holds both in its memory. The final line for this page settled onto the paper with a quiet finality. The door does not close until the night decides what will remain. A faint click sounded from somewhere behind the walls, a tiny latch disengaging, the sound echoing like a promise that the house would keep. The second figure stepped forward, its footfall steady, the wood beneath its shoes trembling in acknowledgement. He realized that the house had prepared a second passage, a twin to the first, each waiting for a curious soul to awaken it. The darkness below seemed to pulse, as if the earth itself were counting the heartbeats of those who dared to cross its threshold. The night outside deepened, the wind howling against the eaves, while inside the house a silent agreement was being forged between timber, stone, and the two wandering souls that now stood on opposite sides of the same secret. Chapter 31. The Breath That Waits. The air in the room grew heavy, a thick vapor that settled on the old table and the wooden chairs, as if an unseen fog had rolled in from the cellar. He felt a soft pull at his chest, a slow inhalation that seemed to come from the opening in the floor, as though the earth itself were drawing his breath down into its depths. The notebook, still open, recorded the sensation with a new entry. The house exhales a cold draft that climbs upward, searching for a listening ear. The next line arrived, the letters spaced apart as if the writer were trying to catch each breath. Each inhalation from below carries the scent of ancient stone, a reminder of long-forgotten foundations. A faint rustle rose from the darkness, the sound of fine particles being stirred by the moving air. The stone-gray figure across the room turned its head slightly, the outline of its face illuminated by a thin shaft of light that slipped through the crack. He sensed the house's heartbeat in the tremor of the floorboards, a low thrum that resonated through his bones. The notebook's ink darkened further, the next sentence forming with a deliberate pressure. The building listens, its timbers tuned to the pulse of the earth's sighs. The following line was written in a careful hand, each word placed with intention. When the wind from below meets the breath above, a quiet conversation begins. A subtle vibration traveled up through the joists, a soft shiver that seemed to caress his spine, as if the house were gently stroking his nerves. He turned his attention to the stone slab that still lay half buried beneath the floor, its surface smooth from years of polishing by unseen hands. The notebook recorded another observation. The slab bears the imprint of countless breaths, each one a silent witness to the house's secret. The next sentence arrived, the ink flowing with a calm certainty. Even the faintest gasp is stored in the grain, a memory etched in wood and stone. A low, resonant tone rose in a hidden chamber, the sound of a single stone striking another, echoing like a distant bell. The stone-gray figure raised its hand, the gesture slow and measured, as if acknowledging the shared breathing of two worlds. He felt the pull grow stronger, the cold draft from below swirling around his legs, the air turning crisp against his skin. The notebook's final line for this section settled onto the page with a weighty finality. The house will keep breathing until the night decides whether the secret remains buried. A soft sigh of wind escaped through a cracked window, the night outside answering the house's quiet call. The stone-gray figure turned away, its back disappearing into the darkness, leaving only the faint outline of a silhouette against the dim glow of the subterranean light. He closed the notebook, the cover snapping shut with a muted thud, as if sealing the conversation that had taken place between the living room above and the chamber below. Chapter 32, The Gentle Push. A subtle pressure rose in the earth, gentle as a hand guiding a child's arm across a dusty floor. He felt the floorboards beneath his feet shift ever so slightly, though giving a tiny surrender to the unseen force. The notebook opened of its own accord, the ink forming a new entry with a quiet determination. The house nudges, not forces, those who tread its boards toward the unknown. The following line appeared, each word placed with an almost reverent care. A soft prod of timber and stone invites the curious to peer deeper. A low creak resonated from the corner where the hidden plank rested, the sound like a whispered invitation. The stone-gray figure across the room turned its head once more, the outline of its eyes catching a glint of the faint light that slipped from the opening. He sensed the push grow steadier, the floorboards trembling under his weight as if urging him forward, toward the yawning gap. The notebook recorded the sensation. The boards respond, a chorus of sighs that guide the footfall toward the dark mouth. The next sentence arrived, the letters forming as if the house were speaking directly to him. Every step taken is a note in the house's endless lullaby. A gentle gust rose from the hidden chamber, the air swirling around his ankles, the scent of damp earth growing stronger. He could see the faint outline of a staircase beginning to form within the darkness, the stone steps appearing like a promise of descent. The notebook added another thought, the ink flowing with a restrained haste. The stairway appears only when the house deems the seeker ready. The following line was written with a calm certainty. The stone beneath the floor lifts, revealing a path that leads into the earth's own heart. A soft click echoed from the far side of the house, a sound like an old latch being released, the resonance traveling through the walls like a whispered secret. He felt the floor give a final, gentle nudge, the hidden board sliding just enough to reveal a narrow passage that beckoned him forward. The notebook's final entry for this moment settled onto the page with a quiet finality. The house's push is patient, waiting for the moment the door will finally open. He lifted his foot into the opening, the cool air from below brushing his skin, the darkness beyond swallowing the light that lingered on the floor. The stone-gray figure stepped back, its silhouette dissolving into the shadows as the passage behind it settled into stillness. The house hummed, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to celebrate the progress of the curious soul who dared to follow the gentle push of unseen hands. Chapter 33. The Fall into Memory. The narrow passage widened just enough for him to fit, the walls of compacted earth pressing against his sides as he moved deeper. The air grew colder, the scent of mineral stone filling his lungs with each inhalation, a reminder that he was now far below the familiar rooms above. The notebook, still clutched tightly, opened to a fresh page as his foot slipped on the slick stone, the ink forming a new passage. The descent is quiet, each step a surrender to the earth's patient grip. The next line arrived, the letter space as if the writer were measuring each drop of cold air. The walls close in, the darkness thickening like a veil drawn over the mind. A low, distant rumble rose from the depths, a sound like ancient stone shifting beneath the weight of centuries. He felt the floor beneath his feet tilt ever so slightly, the passage sloping downward like the belly of a long-forgotten beast. He heard his own breathing echo back at him, the sound amplified by the cavernous space. Each exhale a thin plume of vapor that rose and vanished into the gloom. The notebook recorded his perception. The breath becomes visible, a fleeting ghost that lingers for a heartbeat before fading. The following sentence formed with a careful hand. In the darkness, the mind conjures the shapes of forgotten rooms. A faint, metallic clang rang out from somewhere ahead, the sound reverberating off the stone walls, a reminder that the earth beneath the house still retained remnants of old iron fastenings, long since corroded. He pressed onward, his hand brushing against the rough surface of the passage, the gritty texture of stone slipping through his fingers. The notebook's ink deepened, the line appearing with a quiet certainty. The stone remembers every hand that once traced its grain. The next sentence arrived, the letters forming as if the writer were trying to capture the weight of the moment. Every fingertip leaves a story, each scar a chapter etched in the darkness. A sudden, sharp crack sounded from above, the floorboards of the living room shifting as though the house were acknowledging his plunge. He felt the vibration travel through the stone, a faint tremor that tickled the soles of his boots. He stumbled on a small stone protrusion, losing his balance for a heartbeat before catching himself on the rough wall. The notebook recorded the misstep. A stumble in the deep breathes life into the silence, a reminder of mortality. The next line arrived, the ink flowing with a slight urgency. The fall does not end. It births a new awareness of the earth's quiet song. His foot found a ledge, and he lowered himself onto a shallow platform, the cold stone against his thighs, sending a shiver through his body. The darkness now seemed less a void and more a womb, cradling him in its cool embrace. The notebook added another entry, the words appearing with a thoughtful pause. The platform holds a way to the seeker, a brief sanctuary before the journey continues. He listened to the faint heartbeat of the house above, a murmur that rose and fell like a tide, the sound traveling through the earth to meet him at this hidden place. The final line of this passage settled onto the page, the ink dark and deliberate. The memory of the fall becomes a stone upon which the house builds its quiet reverence. He stood, the notebook clutched to his chest, the darkness around him humming with the quiet insistence of something ancient, patient, waiting for the next step. Chapter 34. The Shape in the Dark. He pressed his palm against the cool stone, feeling the subtle rise and fall of the walls as the earth breathed around him. A faint outline began to emerge in the shadows, the silhouette of a figure that seemed to be molded from the very rock itself. The notebook, its pages still trembling, captured the vision. A shape coalesces, bore a stone in silence, its features merely suggestions. The next sentence formed, the ink lettering sharp as the edges of the emerging form. The figure's shoulders are broad, its head crowned with the faint curve of an ancient crown. A low, resonant hum rose in the darkness, a vibration that thrummed through the stone like a distant drumbeat. He could feel the hum resonating in his bones, the sound growing louder as the figure solidified. The notebook recorded the growing certainty. Each contour sharpens, the eyes of the being forming as dark hollows that swallow light. The following line arrived, the letters placed with a steady hand. The eyes hold the void of ages, reflecting nothing yet seeing everything beneath the floor. A faint, cold wind drifted through the passage, the air stirring the dust that settled on the walls, forming tiny spirals that rose and fell like ghostly fireflies. The figure's mouth opened slightly, the stone lips parting as if to speak, though no sound emerged. The notebook added a new entry, the ink flowing with a solemn rhythm. The stone-shaped mouth holds a secret, a story untold that waits for a breath to give a voice. The next sentence appeared, each word a weighty drop in the empty chamber. The shape stands motionless, yet its presence is a pressure that pushes against the very air. He felt the weight of the figure's gaze, though the eyes were empty voids, a pressure that pressed against his chest, urging him to remember what had been forgotten. The notebook's final line for this moment settled onto the page with a quiet certainty. The house watches the shape, knowing that one day it will be called to speak the names it has kept. A soft, distant crack echoed to the cavern, a reminder that even stone could fracture under the passage of endless time. The figure remained, a statue of memory awaiting its moment of utterance, while the house continued its patient watch. Chapter 35. The place where voices settle. The stone figure stayed still, its presence a silent sentinel amid the cold, damp walls. He sensed the convergence of countless whispers that seemed to gather around the hollow form, as if the darkness itself was a reservoir for the voices of those who had walked the house long before him. The notebook opened to a fresh page, the ink forming a new proclamation. The darkness cradles voices, each a fragment of a life once lived within these walls. The following line arrived, the letters spaced as if each word were a spoken syllable. They linger unheard, swaying like dust motes in a shaft of light that never reaches its depth. A faint, mournful sigh rose in the cavern, the sound thin as a whisper, drifting through the stone and curling around the figure's shoulders. He felt the breath of those long-gone souls, each one a tiny pressure against his ear, a reminder that the house never truly lets go. The notebook recorded the sensation. The sighs are like water dripping from a cracked cup, each drop a story spilling into the void. The next sentence appeared, the ink flowing with a quiet reverence. In the stillness, the voices become a chorus that the stone cannot ignore. A subtle vibration traveled through the floor, the tremor faint yet unmistakable, as if the house itself were resonating with the gathered murmurs. He could feel the vibration through his boots, a gentle reminder that the walls were alive with memory. He turned his attention back to the stone figure, its empty eyes now seeming to flicker with a faint inner light, as if the collected voices were trying to ignite a spark within its hollow gaze. The notebook added another observation. The eyes, though void, act as sockets that hold the echo of every whispered promise. The following line followed, the cursive strokes deliberate. When the house decides, the voices will flood the stone, filling the emptiness with sound. A sudden, soft rustle rose from deep within the earth. The sound as delicate as a leaf falling in a forest, the echo traveling up the passage and merging with the murmurs already present. The stone figure seemed to shudder, the faint echo of a heartbeat reverberating within its core. The notebook recorded the shift. A tremor runs through the stone, a reminder that even the hardest rock can be moved by words. The final line of this passage settled onto the page, the ink dark as midnight. When the voices finally speak, the house will listen and the stone will carry their legacy. He felt an invisible hand brush his cheek, the sensation fleeting, as if the house itself were acknowledging his role as the conduit between the living and the layered whispers of the past. The stone figure remained, its hollow shape now a vessel for the murmurs that lingered, waiting for the moment when the house will release them into the world above. Chapter 36. The space below the first memory. He stepped back from the stone figure, his mind turning to the first hidden chamber he had entered long ago, the place where the original memory had risen from the earth. The passage behind him narrowed once more, the walls of compacted soil closing in like a gentle embrace. The notebook, its pages now lined with the accumulated weight of his observations. Open to a new page, the ink forming a fresh declaration. The first chamber lies beneath the house, a womb of stone and earth that birthed the initial echo. The next sentence arrived, the letters spaced as if the writer were counting the breath between each thought. Its ceiling drips with condensation, each drop a memory that falls from the past. A faint, rhythmic patter sounded from the ceiling, the sound of water echoing through the stone, a whisper of time moving forward. He felt a cold bead of water land on his forehead. The sensation sharp, a reminder of the house's endless cycle of renewal. The notebook recorded the feeling. The droplets cling to skin, each one a fleeting reminder that the house remembers every tear. The following line formed with deliberate calm. The walls are etched with symbols, marks of those who once sought the hidden doorway. He traced his fingers along the ancient carvings, the grooves rough under his touch, the symbols resembling crude circles and lines, a language older than any spoken tongue. The notebook added another observation. The carvings speak in silence, their meaning lost, but their presence a testament to curiosity. The next sentence arrived, the ink flowing like a slow river. In the center of the chamber lies a stone pedestal, smooth and cold, awaiting a weight to press upon it. He knelt before the pedestal, its surface reflecting the dim light, like a dark mirror. The notebook recorded his reverence. The pedestal holds a promise of secret, a weight that will shift the foundations of the house. The following line appeared, the letters precise. When something heavy rests upon it, the earth below awakens, shifting the floor above. A low rumble vibrated through the chamber, the sound of stone grinding against stone, a subtle warning that the house was preparing for another movement. He felt the floor tremble under his feet, the vibration traveling up to the wooden board above, an echo of the ancient mechanism that linked the underground chamber to the rooms above. The notebook added a final entry for this passage. The ink dark and resolute. The house remembers the pressure of every footfall, the weight of every secret placed upon its hidden altar. He rose, the notebook clutched tightly. The words etched in his mind as a reminder that the house's memory extended far beyond the visible walls, down into the very earth that supported it. Chapter 37, the sound of the first memory falling. A sudden, sharp crack split the silence, a sound like a branch snapping under a heavy load. The stone pedestal in the deep chamber had given way, the ancient mechanism releasing a rush of earth that surged upward with a low, grinding roar. He felt the floor above him shudder violently, the timbers groaning in protest as the weight of the moving soil pressed against the underside of the boards. The notebook opened on its own, the ink forming a new line with urgent strokes. The first memory plunged, the stone giving way under its own weight. The next sentence arrived, the letters jagged as if struck by a hammer. The impact sent a ripple through the house, each board trembling like a leaf in a storm. A hollow thud resonated from the passage, the sound traveling through the earth and ringing in the far-reached corners of the building. He could feel his own heartbeat sync with the rhythm of the falling stone, a shared pulse between the living and the hidden past. The notebook recorded the sensation. The echo of the fall lingered, a reminder that the house cannot conceal its own history. The following line appeared, the ink dark as night. Dust rose in the chamber, a cloud of forgotten moments, swirling around the fallen stone. A faint, metallic scent rose from the rubble, the iron of ancient fastenings now exposed to the air, a reminder of the construction that had bound the house together centuries ago. The notebook added another observation. The iron sang a low note as it was uncovered, a chord that resonated through stone and wood alike. The next sentence formed with deliberate calm. When the stone settled, the floor above settled with it, the house breathing a sigh of relief. A soft creak rose from the hallway, the sound of a board settling back into place, the wood lining up once more with a pattern designed by hands long dead. The notebook recorded the final echo of the event. The house took the memory back into its bones, sealing the wound until another curious soul returned. He stood in the dim light of the chamber, the dust settling around his boots, the house's silence once again enveloping him, a reminder that every fall was recorded, every echo stored in the timber and stone. Chapter 38. The second memory learns to listen. The stone-gray figure that had risen from the earth earlier now turned its hollow gaze toward the newly settled floor, its posture still and attentive. He sensed a shift in its presence, as if a new awareness was blossoming within the silent watcher. The notebook opened to a fresh page, the ink forming a line that seemed to breathe with the figure's newfound attention. The second echo grew still, its focus sharpening like a blade honed by time. The following sentence arrived, each word placed with care. It listened to the faintest tremor, the whisper of a board settling into place. A low, resonant hum rose from the floorboards, the vibration traveling up through the joists, a quiet song that only the stone-gray figure could hear. He felt the hum thrumming against his own skin, a subtle vibration that seemed to sync with the pulse of the house itself. The notebook recorded the phenomenon. The sound became a language, a dialect of wood and stone that spoke of ages past. The next line formed, the ink flowing with quiet certainty. Each creak, each sigh of timber, was a syllable in the house's endless narration. He watched as a figure raised a hand, its movement slow, deliberate, as if testing the weight of the air. The notebook added another thought, the letters crisp. The figure's hand hovered over the floor, feeling the vibration of each lingering footstep. The following sentence arrived, the words heavy with reverence. It learned that the house records not only steps but also the intention behind them. A distant, faint tapping sounded from a hallway above, the rhythm of visitors' shoe against the boards, a pattern repeating itself through generations. The stone-gray figure's eyes, though empty, seemed to focus on the source of sound, as if acknowledging the continuation of the cycle. The notebook recorded the observation. The echo recognized the cadence of curiosity, a melody that would never die. The next line appeared, the ink dark as the depth for which the figure had risen. In listening, it became a keeper of the house's secret, a silent guardian of its stories. A soft, almost inaudible sigh rose in the earth below, the sound of soil shifting as if breathing. The figure seemed to inhale, the air around it growing still, the house holding its breath in anticipation of the next unwitting traveler. The notebook's final entry for this segment settled onto the page with a calm resolve. The second memory, now a listener, would watch the doorway open, waiting for the next name to be spoken. He stepped back, the weight of the stone-gray figure's gaze following him, the house's silence returning as a blanket over the room, each timber and stone holding the echo of the new listener that now dwelled within its walls. Chapter 39. The memory begins to change. The stone-gray figure, once still and quiet, now seemed to shift ever so slightly, the faint outline of its shoulders widening, the subtle angles of its jaw softening, as if a hidden current of energy were reshaping it from within. He felt a new pulse emanating from the creature, a subtle vibration that resonated to the floor and into his own spine. The notebook opened to a fresh page, the ink forming a line that captured the transformation. The echo altered, its edges blurring as the house's memory reshaped it. The next sentence arrived, each word placed with intention. It grew taller, its posture straighter, as if the weight of centuries pressed it into purpose. A soft, metallic echo rang out from the walls, the sound of a long-forgotten pipe rusting as it settled into a new position. The house seemed to adjust its internal architecture to accommodate the evolving presence of the echo. The notebook recorded the shift. The house's bones creaked in agreement, allowing the figure to claim a steadier footing. The following line appeared, the ink dark and decisive. Its eyes, once void, now held a faint glimmer, a spark of awareness flickering within the darkness. He felt a subtle warmth spread through the room, the chill receding as the figure's presence seemed to radiate a gentle heat, the kind of comfort that only an ancient dwelling could provide to its loyal sentinel. The notebook added another observation. The glow was not fire, but a memory of sunlight filtered through the house's many windows. The next sentence formed, the letters steady. With each passing moment, the echo adopted the hush of the house, learning to move with its size. A low, rhythmic pulse rose from the foundation, the sound of the house's heart beating beneath the floor, a steady thrum that matched the echo's new cadence. The figure's head inclined slightly, as if listening to the heartbeat of its creator. The notebook recorded the quiet communion. The echo learned the rhythm of the house, its steps syncing with the timber's subtle tremors. The following line arrived, the words echoing the transformation. It no longer stood alone. It became a part of the house's own body, a living extension of its wood and stone. A faint, distant chime rang from above, the sound of a wind chime that had hung in the front hallway for generations, its tones soft and lingering. The echo seemed to respond, its hollow form resonating faintly with the same pitch, a brief harmony that blended the old and the new. The notebook added a final entry for this chapter, the ink dark as night. Thus the memory changed, becoming not merely a shadow but a voice intertwined with the house's soul. He stood in awe, the realization dawning that the house was not a static structure but a living entity, capable of reshaping its own guardians to fit the needs of each passing age. Chapter 40, The Third Footstep. A third footfall entered the hallway, light and tentative, the shoe's sole barely making a sound upon the aged boards. The visitor paused at the threshold, eyes drawn inexplicably to the hidden plank that seemed to hum with an unseen energy. He felt the floorboards beneath his weight shift, the wood responding to the pressure of his step, as if inviting him to press further. The notebook opened by itself, the ink forming a line that captured the moment. A third step approached, its tread light, the house listening for the pattern it would complete. The next sentence arrived, the letters placed with careful precision. The plank resonated, a hollow note echoing back to the timber, a silent invitation to the unknown. He hesitated, the air thick with anticipation, the scent of old pine and damp earth mingling in his nostrils. The notebook recorded his hesitation. His breath held, his heart quickened, as the house waited for the decision that would alter its destiny. The following line formed, the ink dark as the depth of the hidden chamber. The floorboards beneath him vibrated, a subtle tremor urging him to place his weight upon the hidden board. A soft, rhythmic creak rose from the direction of the hidden passage, the sound like a gentle nudge from a patient guardian. He felt a faint pull at his ankle, as if the house itself was guiding his foot toward the plank. The notebook added another observation. His foot hovered, then settled, the board yielding with a sigh as it recognized the pressure. The next sentence arrived, the word steady. The hollow echo rose, a low tone that traveled to the house's veins, announcing the arrival of a new seeker. A distant, muted thump sounded from below, the sound of earth shifting as a hidden door began to respond to his weight. He felt the floor dip ever so slightly, the wood flexing under the added load, the darkness below beckoning. The notebook recorded the shift. The ground beneath him opened a fraction, a crack widening just enough to glimpse the blackness beyond. The following line appeared, the ink flowing with calm resolve. A narrow shaft of night glimmered, inviting the curious soul to descend into the house's hidden heart. He sensed the pull become stronger, a gentle force that seemed to guide him forward, his eyes fixed on the widening crack. The notebook's final entry for this moment settled onto the page with a quiet finality. The third footstep crossed the threshold, and the house prepared to welcome the new memory it would soon bear. A soft click echoed from within the walls, the sound of an ancient latch engaging, the silent promise that the house would now keep a new story among its countless whispered chronicles. Chapter 41, The Weight of the Third Memory. The third figure that rose from the earth after the new visitor's step stood motionless, its stone-gray form identical in hue to the previous echoes. Yet each line of its body seemed to hold a new tension, a weight that pressed against the floor as though burdened by the knowledge of what it had witnessed. He watched, his breast shallow, as the third memory lifted its arms slightly, the motion a quiet acknowledgement of the house's acceptance. The notebook opened to a fresh page, the ink forming a line that captured the presence of the newest echo. The third memory rose, shoulders heavy with the weight of the house's accumulated stories. The next sentence arrived, each word placed deliberately. It stood in the dim light, a silhouette of stone and silence, a testament to the house's endless archive. A low, resonant hum rose from the walls, the sound of timber flexing under the added weight, the house adjusting its frame to accommodate the new presence. He felt the vibration travel up his spine, a reminder that each memory added to the structure's load. The notebook recorded the sensation. The floorboards bowed ever so slightly, the timber yielding to the added burden of another echo. The following line formed, the ink dark and measured. Its eyes, empty pits, reflected the flicker of the distant chandelier, a glint of forgotten light. He could see the faint outline of a chandelier in the hallway above, its crystals catching a faint glow of evening, the light scattering across the stone figure's hollow gaze. The notebook added another observation. The chandelier's reflection in the void hinted at a connection between the worlds above and below. The next sentence arrived, the letters crisp. The third memory felt the pull of the house, a silent command to bear its weight without complaint. A soft, mournful sigh rose from the earth beneath the hidden chamber, the sound of compacted soil settling around the figure's feet, a gentle reminder that the ground itself was accepting another burden. The notebook recorded this. The soil shifted, filling the gaps around the new presence, sealing it within the house's secret heart. The following line appeared, the ink flowing with quiet inevitability. It understood that the house required patience, that each weight added only strength in the foundation. A distant creak echoed from the upstairs hallway, the sound of a door opening and closing, a reminder that life above continued obliviously while the house's hidden chambers filled with whispered echoes. The notebook added a final entry for this chapter, the ink dark as the depths. The third memory accepted its place, the house's burden now shared among three shadows bound together by stone. He stepped back, the weight of the new echo pressing upon his senses, the house's timbers groaning softly in acknowledgement of the increased load. Chapter 42, The Descent of the Second Memory. The second echo, having taken its place among the newly risen shadows, seemed to sense a shift in the earth beneath it. Its stone-gray form shivered ever so slightly, a subtle vibration traveling through its limbs as if an unseen current urged it onward. The notebook opened to a new page, the ink forming a line that captured the restless motion. The second memory felt a tug, a gentle pull from the depths urging it forward. The following sentence arrived, the letters spaced as if the writer were measuring each pull. It turned toward the widening crack, the darkness below beckoning like a promise unfulfilled. A soft, low rumble rose from the deeper chamber, the sound of compacted earth shifting, the stone walls yielding to the movement of the echo. He felt a faint tremor under his feet, the floor responding to the echo's motion, as if the house itself were breathing. The notebook recorded the sensation. The timbers creaked, a quiet acknowledgement of the echo's descent back into the hidden heart. The next line formed, the ink flowing with a deliberate calm, its shoulders lowered, the weight of stone pressing against the earth as it slipped into the abyss. A faint, distant echo of water dripping reached his ears, the sound of moisture gathering in the lower chambers, a subtle reminder of the earth's life force. The notebook added another observation. The drip's rhythm matched the echo steps, a metronome for the descent. The following sentence arrived, the letters precise. The stone-gray figure vanished into the darkness, its outline merging with the shadows. A soft sigh rose from the opening, the air moving upward as if the earth were exhaling after the echo's passage. He felt a brief cooling of the space as the weight of the echo left the floor above, the board settling back into a more stable position. The notebook recorded this shift. The floor beneath the visitor steadied, the absence of the echo easing the strain on the timber. The next line appeared, the ink darker than before. The house, ever patient, recorded the movement, the memory of the second echo now embedded in its bones. A faint, crystalline chime rang from the hallway above, the sound of a wind chime that had hung for decades, its notes delicate and fleeting. The house seemed to smile, the gentle music echoing the quiet loss of the echo below. The notebook added a final entry for this passage, the ink settling with solemn finality. The second memory descended, returning to the earth that had birthed it, leaving the house to wait for the next step. He stood alone, the notebook heavy in his hands. The house's silence now a little less burdened, the weight of the hidden chambers shifting ever so slightly in response to the echo's journey. Chapter 43. The third memory begins to change. The third echo, now settled back within the hidden chamber, seemed to pulse with subtle energy, as though the house's steady rhythm had begun to reshape it. Its stone surface shimmered faintly, a soft luminescence that had not been present before, hinting at an internal transformation. The notebook opened on its own accord, the ink forming a line that captured the alteration. The third memory glowed faintly, its stone skin taking on a soft sheen as change washed over it. The next sentence arrived, each word placed with deliberate care. It sensed the house's breath, the slow current of time reshaping its form from within. A low, resonant hum rose from the walls, the sound of timber flexing under the subtle shift in the echo's mass, the house accommodating the new shape. He felt the vibration travel up his spine, the timber speaking in a language older than any spoken word. The notebook recorded the sensation. The floor sang a different note, a harmonic tremor that matched the echo's quiet transformation. The following line formed, the ink dark as the depths. Its eyes, once void, now held a glimmer, a spark of awareness born from the house's patient watch. He could see a faint reflection of the chandelier's light in those altered hollows, the glimmer catching and refracting in a way that suggested a new consciousness. The notebook added another observation. The echo's gaze lingered longer, as if trying to understand a world above that it had never known. The next sentence arrived, the letters steady. It shifted its stance, the stone shoulders straightening, a posture of purpose taking root. A soft crack echoed from the far wall, the sound of a new fissure opening, the house adjusting its internal architecture to accommodate the echo's evolving shape. The notebook recorded the event. The house widened a hidden niche, creating space for the echo's growth, a silent collaboration of stone and timber. The following line appeared, the ink flowing with assurance. With each heartbeat of the house, the echo absorbed a fragment of its memory, becoming more than stone. A distant, gentle wind whispered through a cracked window, the breeze stirring the dust in the hallway, a reminder that the world outside continued its own cycle while the house refined its inner guardian. The notebook added a final entry for this chapter, the ink dark and resolute. Thus the third memory changed, no longer merely a shadow, but an echo infused with the house's quiet wisdom. He stood, the room now humming with a faint, unfamiliar resonance. The stone echo's transformation a reminder that even the most ancient structures could evolve, reshaping themselves in response to the passage of time. Chapter 44. The hollow sound returns. A soft, hollow timbre rose once again from the hidden opening, a sound that seemed to echo the original beckoning that had first drawn him down into the earth. The resonance was deeper, richer, as if the house had added layers of memory to its core. The notebook opened to a fresh page, the ink forming a line that captured the revived tone. The hollow note reemerged, a low vibration that traveled through timber and stone alike. The next sentence arrived, the letters spaced as if the writer were measuring the distance the sound traveled. It resonated to the floorboards, a reminder that the house never truly forgets a whisper. A faint shiver rippled across the room, the boards trembling in response, the house's heartbeat aligning with the revived sound. He felt a subtle pressure in his chest, as though the echo were reaching out to his own pulse. The notebook recorded the sensation. His own breath synchronized with a hollow, a whisper connection between the living and the hidden. The following line formed, the ink dark and deliberate. The sound gathered momentum, growing louder as it ascended toward the hallway above. A low creak rose from the ceiling, the joists flexing under the renewed vibration, the house acknowledging the echo's ascent. The notebook added another observation. The house answered with a sigh, the timber sighing in harmony with the hollow tone. The next sentence arrived, the words steady. Through the cracks, the echo seeped, a thin thread of darkness reaching for the light. A soft rustle of paper fluttered from the notebook itself, the pages turning as if carried by the same current that moved the hollow sound. The notebook recorded this. The notebook's pages rustled, each leaf catching the echo's vibration like a sail catching wind. The following line appeared, the ink flowing with quiet certainty. Soon the hollow will become a voice, a bridge between the stone below and the world above. A distant bell rang from the front porch, its chime faint but clear, the sound traveling across the yard and back into the house, mingling with the hollow echo. The notebook added a final entry for this moment, the letters deep as night. The house prepared to give the hollow a name, a song that would linger in its walls forever. He listened, the resonance filling him. The house's patient patience now manifest as a promise that the darkness below would soon find a way to speak, to be heard, to become part of the living narrative that the house had guarded for centuries. Chapter 45, The Fourth Memory. The fourth echo rose from the earth with a sudden gasp, the stone surface trembling as it emerged into the dim light of the hidden chamber. Its form was similar in hue to the others, yet a new tension ran through its limbs, a restless energy that set apart. The notebook opened anew, the ink forming a line that captured the arrival of the fourth echo. The fourth memory stirred, its stone body cracking the silence of the hidden room. The next sentence arrived, the letters placed with a quiet urgency. It stood, shoulders squared, eyes empty pits searching for a purpose beyond the darkness. A low, mournful sigh rose from the walls, the sound of timber yielding under the weight of the new stone figure. He felt a subtle shift in the floor's vibration, as if the house were bracing for the addition of another burden. The notebook recorded the shift. The floorboards groaned softly, acknowledging the presence of another stone keeper. The following line formed, the ink dark as the depths. Its mouth formed a thin line, as if ready to speak but held back by ancient restraint. He watched the fourth echo inhale, the air around it growing cold, the stone surface gathering a faint frost that glistened in the faint glow of the fungi. The notebook added another observation. A chill settled on its skin, the cold of the earth mingling with the house's lingering breath. The next sentence arrived, the words deliberate. It sensed the weight of history, the stories etched into the timber surrounding it. A faint click echoed from above, the sound of a latch being pulled, the house reacting to the new presence. The notebook recorded the reaction. The house shifted, a hidden door inching open to accommodate the fourth echo's arrival. The following line appeared, the ink flowing with a quiet certainty. Its eyes, though empty, seemed to hold a glimmer of curiosity, a desire to understand the world above. A soft rustle of dust rose from the floor, the particles swirling around the echo's feet, as if the air itself were acknowledging its presence. The notebook added a final entry for this chapter, the letters deep and resolute. Thus the fourth memory entered, adding its stone weight to the house's endless ledger of shadows. He felt the heaviness of the new echoes settle into floor, the timber adjusting, the house seeming to breathe a little deeper as an additional stone silhouette took its place among the guardians of the hidden chambers. Chapter 46. The fourth memory learns of silence. The fourth echo, now settled among the stone guardians, remained perfectly still, its posture poised as though awaiting a command. Yet a subtle change began to ripple through its form, a softening of the rigid lines as the silence of the house seeped into its pores. The notebook opened automatically, the ink creating a line that reflected the quiet shift. The fourth echo quieted, the stone surface absorbing the house's hush. The next sentence arrived, the letters spaced as if the writer were measuring each breath. It ceased its movement, allowing the timber to settle into a deeper rest. A faint, low hum rose from the walls, the resonance of age responding to the echo's stillness, a sound like a distant tide rolling onto a shore. He felt a gentle pressure against his ears, as if the house were whispering a secret only the stone could hear. The notebook recorded the hum, The house sang a muted lullaby, a vibration that draped the echo in calm. The following line formed, the ink dark and smooth. Its eyes, still void, reflected the soft glow of the unseen lullaby, a light that did not burn. He sensed the echo's awareness expanding, the stone taking the melody of the house, the silence becoming a language of its own. The notebook added another observation. In stillness, the echo learned the cadence of the house, recognizing each creak, each sigh as a word. The next sentence arrived, the words deliberate. It no longer yearned for sound, for the quiet had become its voice. A soft thud echoed from the hallway above. The sound of a footstep paused, the traveler listening to the faint vibrations that now filled the house. The notebook recorded this interaction. The visitor above felt a subtle shift, a calm that seemed to settle the very air. The following line appeared, the ink flowing with patient certainty. The house, acknowledging the echo's acceptance, steadied its own heartbeat. A gentle creak sounded from the joists, the timbers aligning with the echo's newfound tranquility, the whole structure humming in unison. The notebook added a final entry for this passage, the letters firm as stone. Thus the fourth memory embraced the silence, becoming a vessel for the house's unspoken story. He stepped back, the quiet in the room deepening. The stone echo now a silent sentinel, its presence a reminder that sometimes the most profound communication is forged in the absence of words. Chapter 47, The House Above. Above the hidden chambers, the house continued its daily routine, its windows reflecting the waning moonlight, its doors opening and closing with the rhythm of ordinary life. Yet a subtle shift lingered in the air, a feeling that something unseen had altered the building's foundation. The notebook opened on a fresh page, the ink forming a line that captured the house's altered state. The house above sensed a change, a faint tremor running through its beams. The next sentence arrived, the letters spaced as if the writer were gauging the distance between each heartbeat. Its walls seemed to breathe a little deeper, the timber flexing with new purpose. A soft creak rose from the staircase, the steps adjusting to an unseen weight that had settled below, the sound gentle, almost reverent. He felt the floor beneath his feet give a tiny, reassuring give as he walked across the hallway. The notebook recorded the sensation. Each footfall felt lighter, as if the house had redistributed its burden. The following line formed, the ink dark as night. The chandelier above swayed ever so slightly, its crystals catching a phantom glow from the chamber below. He glanced upward, the faint spark of light that seemed to emanate from the hidden depth, reflected in the glass droplets that hung from the chandelier's arms. The notebook added another observation. The light above and the darkness below intertwined, a silent dialogue of reflection. The next sentence arrived, the words deliberate. The house listened to its own changes, the timbers humming in quiet response. A distant wind whispered through a cracked window, the breeze carrying a faint scent of earth, a reminder that the subterranean chambers were still part of the whole. The notebook recorded this. The wind carried whispers of soil, a reminder that the house's roots run deep. The following line appeared, the ink flowing with steady certainty. The house above, aware of its hidden heart, stood ready for the next visitor to cross its threshold. A soft, distant laugh drifted from the living room, a child's mirth echoing through the rooms, the sound bright and alive, a stark contrast to the quiet weight below. The notebook added a final entry for this segment, the letters dark and calm. Even as laughter filled the upper rooms, the house kept its secret chambers vigilant, awaiting the next step. He stood in the hallway, the light from the chandelier casting gentle patterns on the floor, the house above humming softly, a living organism aware of the shift occurring beneath its surface. Chapter 48, The Fifth Memory's First Night. The fifth echo rose from the earth as night deepened, its stone form glimmering faintly under the dim glow that filtered down from the hidden opening. The figure's posture was tentative, as if feeling the weight of a world it had never known. The notebook opened on its own, the ink forming a line that captured the echo's emergence. The fifth memory emerged at dusk, its stone skin cold, its eyes empty. The next sentence arrived, the letters spaced as though the writer sensed the stillness of the night. It stood in the darkness, listening to the quiet hum of the earth beneath. A soft sigh rose from the deep chamber, the sound of soil settling, the quiet exhalation of the earth after the echo's arrival. He felt a cool breeze brush his cheek, the air carrying the faint scent of damp stone. The notebook recorded the atmosphere. The air tasted of mineral rain, a reminder of the world below the house's foundations. The following line formed, the ink dark as the night. The echo's shoulders drooped, a sign of fatigue from the long journey upward. He could see a thin line of pale light seeping through the opening, highlighting the echo's outline, the stone catching the glow like a candle flame catching dust. The notebook added another observation. The light traced the echo's form, casting a soft halo that seemed to whisper promises of purpose. The next sentence arrived, the words deliberate. It raised a hand, feeling the texture of the stone walls, searching for a place to belong. A faint, distant ticking sounded from above, the rhythmic ticking of an old clock in the hallway. Each tick a reminder of time moving on while the echo lingered. The notebook recorded this. The house above kept its own rhythm, unaware of the new stone heart beating below. The following line appeared, the ink flowing with gentle certainty. The echo breathed in the chill, its stone chest rising with the faint pulse of the earth. A soft rustle of leaves drifted in through a cracked window, the wind carrying the scent of autumn, a reminder of the world outside the house's walls. The notebook added a final entry for this night, the letters deep as a cavern. Thus the fifth memory stood in the dark, awaiting the house's next word to give it purpose. He watched the fifth echo remain still, the faint glow around it slowly fading as the night deepened. The house above continuing its ordinary routine while the hidden chambers kept a new stone guardian waiting for its turn in the endless cycle. Chapter 49. The Fifth Memory is Listening. The stone-gray figure that had risen on the night of the fifth memory settled into a crouch, its rough shoulders sinking into the cold earth as if it were trying to hear something that lay far beneath the foundation. A thin, high-pitched keening drifted up from the deepest fissure, a sound that resembled the wind sighing through a narrow cavern, and the echo tilted its head toward the source. The notebook, lying open on the slab beside him, began to fill itself once more, the ink spelling a new warning. The fifth keeper leans forward, ears attuned to the murmur of the abyss. The following sentence arrived, each word placed with deliberate care. A tremor of stone reverberates, a low vibration that crawls along the ancient masonry. A soft crackle rose from the walls, the sound of mineral crystals shifting against one another, and the echo's hand brushed the rough surface as if testing the texture of the whisper. The notebook recorded the sensation. Its palm meets the gritty grain, feeling the faint pulse that the house sends through its veins. The next line formed, the letters dark as the void. The hush below carries fragments of forgotten prayers, half-spoken and forever suspended. A distant drip fell from some unseen crack far overhead, each tiny splash striking the stone floor like a silent drumbeat, marking time in a language only the earth understood. The notebook added another observation, the script steady, the echo notes each droplet, cataloging the rhythm as though it were a metronome for the night. The following sentence arrived, the ink flowing with a patient cadence. With every faint patter, the stone figure draws nearer to the hidden well of memory. A barely perceptible shiver ran to floorboards, the house's timber responding to the echo's heightened awareness with a faint sigh that seemed to say, "I hear you." The notebook recorded the house's reply. The beams whisper back, a subtle resonance that mingles with the echo's own listening. The next line appeared, its letters crisp and clear. In that exchange, the darkness gains a voice, and the house gains a listener. A low, resonant hum rose from the deepest layer, a tone that reminded him of a long-forgotten chant, and the fifth echo's eyes, though empty, seemed to catch a glimmer of that ancient melody. The notebook sealed the moment with a final entry for this passage. Thus, the newest guardian becomes the house's ear, forever bound to the murmurs of the ground. He rose slowly, the weight of the stone-keeper's attention pressing against his own, a reminder that the house was no longer a silent monolith, but a creature that listened as keenly as it recorded. Chapter 50, The Six Memories' First Breath. A thin, cold draft slipped through the fissure in the floor, rising like a pale ribbon and curling around a newly formed stone silhouette. The figure inhaled. The sound was a soft, stifled sigh that seemed to pull the dust into tiny spirals that hung in the dim light. The notebook, still lying on the nearest slab, turned its pages of its own accord, the ink spilling a line that described a moment. The sick spirit draws the night air into its hollow chest, feeling the chill settle into every grain of stone. A faint metallic clink rang from the joist above, a rusted nail striking timber as the house adjusted to the added weight. The vibration traveled down to the floorboards, a low tremor that brushed the back of the Six Memories' neck and made the stone skin quiver ever so slightly. The next sentence appeared, the letters spaced as if the writer were measuring each heartbeat. The air grows thin and sharp, each inhalation a reminder that the world above still breathes while the depths remain still. A distant, muffled thump echoed from the hallway, the footfall of a late-night wanderer whose shoes scraped the worn carpet. The sound reached the hidden chamber as a faint pulse, a reminder that life continued. The end.